to the Safety Doc Podcast with author, radio host, and nationally recognized safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Join us each week as we discuss the best and most bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. Follow Dr. Perrodin on Twitter at SafetyPhD. And remember, the truth will keep you safe.
Hey everybody, it is your good friend Dr. David Perrodin from down here in the North Star Recording Studio on September 11th, 2022. This is a special show. It's one I didn't have planned, but thought it was important to talk about the aspects of the 9/11 harbor rescue from Lower Manhattan in 9 hours, 500,000 people. I wrote about it extensively in School of Airs. So several chapters are dedicated to that rescue. So, a lot of people think about it as a purely mechanical rescue. You have 150 boats that transfer people from Lower Manhattan to Hoboken and other areas. And numerous books are written on just the technical aspects of that, right? But there's something deeper, something called the psychological transference dynamic. That's what I wrote about in School of Air. So we're going to talk about it today. How did the psychology work out for this rescue of 500,000 people in 9 hours? Which seems kind of unthinkable to be like, whoa, how would you assemble something like that if you were tasked with doing that as an emergency coordinator, saying, we have to move 500,000 people. Yeah, it's done in 9 hours. Nobody's injured. Just a phenomenal rescue. So we're going to get into the psychological side of that. So just a moment. Let's go over to the chat and welcome in Timothy Sokol. Welcome. And Solitude Surfer and Robert Ribbit Harrison. Everything is better, folks, with zero weight oil. Robert Ribbit Harrison. So yeah, let's going to move us up. So let me change this up a little bit. There we go. And switch this. All right. Kind of a lot of stuff going on there. So yeah, the 9/11 rescue, big part of my book, not the Velocity of Information, School of Airs, Rethinking School Safety in America, the book that I released in 2019. So I am just kind of cleaning things up here, folks. There we go. All right. So as we kick it off, this is the book I'll be talking about right here. School of Airs, Rethinking School Safety in America. So this is available in paperback, hard copy, ebook, and also audiobook narrated by me. And this book is the most honest book written about the $3 billion school safety industry, but within it, there are many areas that don't specifically address school safety, but more or less the safety mentality, including the rescue that occurred of 500,000 people in 9 hours from Lower Manhattan, September 11th, 2001. So let me go back to, what I was doing that day. So I was teaching small district in rural Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, and a student came in, knocked on my door, and it was a time that I didn't have students in my room, and said, "Hey, like Mr. P, did you hear about like the plane crash in New York and all that?" I'm like, "Well, no." And so he said, "Well, get on to the internet, right?" Which was still kind of new back then. So I remember, getting on and going to Yahoo News. Well, it was immediately from, the first thing that showed up on Yahoo News. And then learning about the attacks and just how everything kind of shut down, at the school that day. People turned their TVs on, kids gathered around and staff. And I remember going home, and that was before I had this house. We lived, excuse me, I taught all day yesterday, so my voice is Um, not super strong, and I don't want to strain it too much tonight because I have Graham Wilson on the show tomorrow night for Safety Doc, episode 186, a pilot from Canada. So that'll be an awesome show. But yes, I remember coming home and seeing, this multi-block line of cars in front of the gas station. And because people were afraid, that there wouldn't be tankers coming in with gas, the US would be going at war with the Middle East and all of this. And so it was a really bizarre kind of 24 hours. It reminded me of the onset of COVID, right around March 20th, where basketball games were shut down at halftime and they're telling people, you got to be safer at home. It was kind of that type of feel. And it didn't last that long though, right? Within a day or two, you realize the attacks were over. They weren't going to continue. But yeah, then there was this really odd aspect of remember the powder that was being mailed to people, the anthrax threats, started right after 9/11 too. So, but let me get right into the rescue. So, Lower Manhattan, when the rescue happened on Lower Manhattan. So Lower Manhattan is an island, right? And when the attacks happened on World Trade Center 1 and 2, the island, the bridges were closed, so you couldn't get off of the island. And the only way you could, get off of the island would be by some kind of boat. So you were stuck there. Now, a lot of people came down to the financial district, which is near World Trade Center, Battery Park, which is so that is your financial district, right? So you have hundreds of thousands of people who come into work, and that's where they are, but they don't necessarily live there. So September 11th, 2001, these people are there. They can't get out. Now, let's set the stage for the psychology. So the psychology, hey, it's the Michael Deacon program. Let me get over here. This is a rare shout out. Wow, thank you, Michael, for being over here. Respect. Thank you very much for stopping over here. Appreciate it. Yeah, let's do All Pro Lemon 10 is falling in. So it's rained here for like the last 30 hours in a row. I left just it was longer than that. I left in the morning to go to the university to teach, and it rained on the way there, rained on the way home, and it rained. It's been raining all day. It's raining right now. So, Jordan, always look for the heroes. There will always be heroes, Mr. Rogers. So, yeah. And I think when we get into this, you'll identify, I'll identify, right, who I believe the heroes are, but I'm going to also identify the psychology of what made this possible, which would be a great show here. Be great to talk about sometime on the Michael Deacon program. So I love Michael's show. I listen to his show frequently, and when I'm not able to listen to it, I download and rip it on MP3 and listen to it while I'm doing other things. So, and our good friend Bacon Maldito. So thank you, everybody. So yeah, what was 9/11? So framing things out, right? We have Lower Manhattan, we have Battery Park, we have this financial district, and you can't leave, right? And the other thing is people don't believe that the attacks are over. So that's something to make clear right away is after Tower 2 was struck and after both of the towers actually fell, there was not a sense that this was it. This was done. The Murrah City building or the Murrah City bombing in Oklahoma City, prior to that would have been another, Sentinel domestic terrorist event. But after that, there was a sense, right, that it was complete. That wasn't the sense at all with 9/11. The additional, tower to fall. There was a thought, there could be latent, explosives out in the harbor. There could be things all around, right? So people who wanted to get off the island, were not like, this is done. I want to get out of here. I want to get home. They wanted to get out of there. They wanted to get home off the island. They believed, the island was being targeted, Lower Manhattan. But they also were in the middle of this. This was happening. This was not over, right? So so that's really so I want to make sure I have this accurate. So World Trade Center 7 was the last one to fall. What time did that fall? So 5:20 p.m. Eastern time. So again, the towers 1 and 2 attacked in the morning. 5:20 p.m. World Trade Center 7 collapses. So as this rescue is happening, which is shortly after noon Eastern time on September 11th, 2001, everybody believes this is still an ongoing event, right? That is especially right there in Lower Manhattan. As a nation, that belief was very prevalent too. But again, you don't have the 7th tower coming down until later that afternoon. So let's break this out a little bit, right? Yeah. So how do you practice to rescue 500,000 people from an island, right? I mean, it's kind of, you think of Dunkirk, and people will say this is American Dunkirk, kind of in a very broad way. Dunkirk was a boat rescue, and there were a lot of civilian boats involved, but that was over days, and that was also in a military context. And but this is a civilian rescue, right? So let's talk about the first key figure. The first key figure is Admiral Loy. Admiral Loy. So Admiral Loy is with the Coast Guard. And Admiral Loy identifies, right, what is happening in Lower Manhattan, knows that, hey, there are only a limited number of Coast Guard boats, fire, and police boats. We need to get more support down there to help people get off the island. So what he does is goes on to maritime radio. Again, this is all written about in School of Airs, right? And it's great to listen to this on audiobook. But he goes on to maritime radio, and he says, if you have a boat and you can get down to Lower Manhattan, into the harbor, right, rescue people from Battery Park. That's it. That's the only directive that he gives. It is a complete alpha move. It is a primacy move, a cornerstone move, saying this is what you need to do, right? You need to get down there and you need to participate in the rescue. Not that you need to line up and 7 boats deep and you need to bring this, you need to do this, you need to check in with whoever. That stuff wasn't a part of anything, right? It was just get down there, and if you can help out, help out. So you had people coming in with ferry boats, so passenger ferries, tugboats, merchant ships, private vessels, New York City Fire Department and Police Department boats, about 150 boats total. They'll never know the total boats. Not everybody, who participated was identified, but about 150 boats. Now, a large number of those boats, though, were not government boats. These are private boats. So people are coming down with these boats and they're figuring out this rescue. Now, Battery Park isn't necessarily designed in 2001 to be a place where you're offloading and unloading a lot of people. Yes, the ferries would come over to transport people from New Jersey into Battery Park to get to work, but there were other places closer to that to get to your transit system. Battery Park, for the most part, in 2001 was kind of more or less, like just some berthing areas and some seawall, right? So, but this was the area where people were coming to. They were getting out of where the towers were, and all of the debris and dust and plume of smoke, and they're heading down to the harbor. So, wow. So people are coming down to the harbor. In total, about 500,000 people were evacuated from Lower Manhattan. So nobody drilled for this, right? Admiral Loy comes on and says, do the rescue, do what you have to do. So people are hearing this and people participate in the rescue. People that have all different types of boats and experience, they're coming down. And if you look at this, right, you're thinking, that's not going to work and all of that, but somehow it worked. People knew where to line up and how to take a door from inside a boat and use it as a gangplank and use a sheet and write Hoboken on it to get up someone from Lower Manhattan over to Hoboken, so at least they could get closer to where they needed to go. So we know all of those like technical things happen. Now let's talk about the psychological part. You're walking down, or you're maybe running, but you're dazed and you're going down to Battery Park. Once you get there, that's it. Like, you stop and people line up behind you, behind you, behind you. And also like people weren't fighting to try to get to the front, even though this is a disaster situation. A few things is if people when people start to move in a direction in a disaster, other people tend to follow because they believe like, oh, they're going to safety, right? So there's this perception that the first people to start to go down there knew what they were doing, and then other people followed them. So you're going down to Lower Manhattan to Battery Park, which is you're right there, and then it's New York Harbor. Um, so as people come down, the question is, why do they believe that they would be rescued? Why do they believe that was their best bet? And these boats are coming in, right? Like a tugboat is coming in, a ferry boat, and stuff like that. And there's multiple ways to think about that. Oh, it's this rescue force that is here to save us, right? But maybe there's another way to look at it, right? And that is, this attack is going on, and whoever's the captains of these boats are getting out of here. They believe the harbor is being bombed or being mined, and they want to get in and put to port and try to get to whatever safety on land, because maybe it's a lot safer on land than it is to be in a boat in the harbor right now. So how was it that these people, that looking out here and seeing all these boats coming in, some people weren't like, they're coming in because they're terrified. They're trying to get themselves saved. Like they're trying to get away because there's additional attacks. So that's a part of psychology that wasn't really explored. And when I worked with the New York Department of Planning, and that's all documented in School of Airs, right? Of why didn't people think that? Because I believe there are times in history people would think that, and I actually think right now, if this was to happen in modern times, people would be more skeptical of what's happening, right? That the boats are coming in more or less, they're fleeing unless when the boats get in or they get some directive or something comes through a phone, like a phone message is go to the harbor, some emergency thing or some drones, saying go to the harbor and, the boats will come in and rescue. But yeah, it was wild stuff. So you're coming down and, so these captains are coming in, they're trying to do this rescue. So let's look at the psychology of the people involved in the rescue. So specifically the 500,000 people that were on Lower Manhattan went to Battery Park and were rescued. Why did they believe that rescue force was going to be there? And why did they believe it was going to be there? And why did they believe it would be effective in getting them off? Like you had other things, like you could have gone to other places of Lower Manhattan and hunkered down in a building, 4 blocks away from the towers to try to, at least have this bulk of building around you to try to stay safe. No, it was to get off this island, right? But why would you believe again that these boats are there to rescue you? And it goes into something called the transference dynamic, which I wrote about in the book. So the transference dynamic is where you look at when people were in their formative years, right? Things that happened to us when we were growing up. Let's just say that. Things that happened to us when we were growing up that influence how we think now, right? So let's go back. The people who were rescued from Lower Manhattan, largely the demographic studies and things like that indicate person about 40 years old and worked in finance or real estate. That made up more than 50% of the people. And remember, like when the mass of people do things, other people generally follow along with that. So your mass of people was these are people 40 years old who worked in finance or real estate. So okay, so 2000, so we're backing it up 40. So born in 1960. So what was happening, to these folks in the 70s and 80s, early 80s, right? Kind of their formative years, right? So you go back and you start to look at that. What was happening? Well, we had the Cold War, right? That was very overt in the 70s and 80s, right? That Russia was our enemy. that the government would protect us if there was a war with Russia. In 1983, think of the things that were communicated in media. In 1983, we had the movie The Day After on ABC, one of the most terrifying movies about nuclear war that I've ever seen. I don't think you'd be able to show anything like that on just regular television today. We saw it very pervasive in our entertainment. Nana, the song 99 Red Balloons, which was about NATO in Europe. Sting, I hope the Russians love their children too. The movie Rocky IV in 1985, remember Drago, right, from the Soviet Union, Rocky and the USA. So it's really protagonist, antagonist values. And this was really training people, right, that there was an enemy out there and the enemy was Russia. And also if anything happened, right, a lot of the talk that was coming out from Reagan, strategic defense initiative, right, when Ronald Reagan was elected president. I remember watching on TV the early, Star Wars defense initiative, the graphics they had, which, at that time in the very early 80s looked very impressive. Here's a satellite that would shoot down a nuclear missile if it was heading toward the US and all of that. But again, the thought was you have a defined enemy, all right? As a country, your enemy is you grew up right with this. There was an enemy, and that your country was doing steps to defend. And if anything happens, you trust your country to defend you, and they will defend you robustly against that enemy. And it was like layered over and over and over and over and over again in media, right? So we just were inculcated, with that. If that was your generation, and that was the generation, right, that was on Lower Manhattan for the most part. These are the folks who, when they were growing up, they were watching Rocky IV. They were coming out of the movie theater and they were ready to punch out the first Ruski who crossed their path. They had the Walkman on, boom, and the cassette tape, and they're listening to Nana. So this is called transference dynamic, right? That's one of the reasons, is probably the most compelling reason, right? You go to the harbor and you are, first of all, you expect that, this is an attack. It's an attack from the outside, not the inside. It's an attack. Not necessarily now that in 2001 you would have thought a Soviet attack because, right, Soviet Union had fallen, but it's attack. We had the war, with Iraq, and it's pretty. So it's an attack from the outside, right? It's an outside attack coming in, and you believe your country will mobilize resources then to provide this rescue to you. Your transference, our country will rescue us, right? So this was a big part of it. So you're anticipating that this rescue will happen. When these boats are coming in, you believe they're there for you, and they happen to be there for you, but they could have been coming in just to get out of the harbor, right? And then suddenly this rescue manifests out of nothing, and in 9 hours it concludes. So system develop, it does what it needs to do, and then it concludes, which is amazing to think of too. But that's because people were already, who are going to be rescued, they were thinking down the road. Like, you didn't have to sell them that this tugboat or this small ferry boat or this personal boat was, this person had the credentials and the skill and they could trust them, and the boat's not going to get overloaded and all of these things. Like, none of that was on the table. I mean, the fact was you just had to believe that this was a rescue force sent there for you, that this was manifested by some whatever, which Admiral Loy, you had no idea at the time. And they knew what they were doing. So you came there with that belief. And because you had that belief, you kind of made the system work, right? You weren't, someone throws down a door, which happened, right? Door as a gangplank and stuff like that. You went over it. Like, you didn't question it. And you didn't have to get to you didn't live in Hoboken, but if you could get to Hoboken, that was closer to where you lived, right? So you could do simulated annealing, take another step, get a car ride, a bus, whatever is running, walk, get further, closer to where you're supposed to be, closer to home, right? So this is a big psychological aspect, right? That you anticipate this rescue. So let's get over to the chat right here. Shelter and Michael Deacon, similar to what's happening right now. Tell me more about that, Jordan, because I don't think it is similar to what's happening right now. But I could be wrong. Like maybe you're looking at this in a way that I'm not seeing. I don't I don't think the transference dynamic would work today, and I think I'm very skeptical about how the transference dynamic would work in the future because what information do you trust? Back on 9/11, right, as people were going down to the harbor, they're not going to their phones and getting updates from Yahoo. They're getting text messages from people, right, who are saying, "Hey, you work at whatever, like get off the island and this is going on." But this is all via text. They're not their phones are not, we didn't have smartphones in 2001, right? So today, something like this, it would, it would be a challenge to get accurate information. And if this was coordinated, right, you could have spoofed information, avatar realism, deepfake realism, that would be very confusing. Even, if that was brought into a large scale event, it would be very hard to tell what was authentic and what wasn't. It's like Major League Baseball when the in person, or you couldn't attend games in this 2020 season because of the pandemic, but yet Fox Sports, which I wrote about in my book The Velocity of Information, so of how Fox Sports just said, well, we can make avatars, right? We can make all the stadiums full with people who aren't there. And they did, right? And they put a video out that was 30, 40 seconds on that. So pretty scary stuff. But yeah, this whole thing, the transference dynamic of the psychology, and that's what I wrote about because when I work with new school administrators, and yeah, I had an 8-hour class yesterday. We talk about what are we teaching? What are the experiences now? What would kids do now? What would people do now? People, as they go to the harbor, right? Would they go to the harbor or would they go to their phone? Or would they be walking to the harbor just numbly in a group as they're looking down at their phone, right? And there's a different component to this. I don't think it would be as precise, nearly as precise. And I don't think people would be as trusting that as they got to the battery park and they see these boats coming in. I'm not convinced they would say that's a rescue force versus, oh my God, like they're getting off of the water too, because of this attack is happening in real time. This is still ongoing. They're being attacked. And even would people go down to the harbor or would people just kind of, group together and try to, be 4 blocks away from the World Trade Center? I don't know. I am fairly convinced the fact of just going to a harbor, believing then in this force that would create itself, and then going willingly into that and confidently kind of, and these people organically working in this. I think that's a moment in time, and I don't think it would replicate. Even today, like would all of these boats and people, and who their hearts were completely into helping their fellow man, right? But would this work, right? Would this work, or would this be some weird hyper management that would come in with a couple government vessels of saying, okay, like you're all here for the rescue, like stay over in this part and we'll call you in when we need to call you in? Or how would this go? I guess, who's your Admiral Loy? Would you have an Admiral Loy today? The video boat lift, which is 11 minutes long, right there, we'll give you a context for what I'm talking about. Narrated by Tom Hanks, right? But the Admiral Loy is your hero, right? He is your primacy person, the person, your alpha, the person that sets the corner. And that's what I talked about yesterday with my students, not exactly with 9/11, but saying, we had a case study, right? Law student with autism wanders. And we've kind of talked about it here. I go more in depth in there in the class, right? But, what do you do? And then how do you set the corner decisively, say, this is what we're going to do? You don't have time to, you have, you're informed, you're debriefed, you have to make a decision. You can't continue to try to collect information and to wait because time is critical. So you have to make a decision. And if it turns out bad, then it turns out bad. And afterwards, if you're criticized, people point out these things, and it's like, well, everything's laminated to context and time. Every decision, I have professional discretion. Admiral Loy, as an admiral, right, has professional discretion to make this decision. By the way, he wasn't criticized after the fact, at least not, widely or any substantial groups, and he also kind of just faded away. He didn't use this then to give keynotes every day for $100,000. He's a remarkable person, but Admiral Loy set the tone. And so when I go, like yesterday with the school administrators, I said, who's your tone setter, right? Whether it's your principal or your teacher in charge in these buildings, like who is the person who will say, boom, this is what we're going to do. And that's a fuzzy question, because people are less willing to do that today. Flat out, people are less willing to do that. Why? Oh, I could get in trouble, right? If I do that, I have to measure this. Maybe, I didn't run it past a committee to do this and all of that. Admiral Loy. So let's look at this. Admiral Loy, 9/11. Admiral James Loy. So Admiral James Loy. Video on YouTube is boat lift. There we go. So yeah. So Loy was born in 42. So there's some transference dynamic value here in looking at Loy. So what happened to Loy? What was Loy experiencing when he was also in his formative years? So you're thinking, teens, early 20s. Sputnik, right? United States putting a man on the moon. Also Cuban Missile Crisis. Like these are all formative things in his career. So what do some of those things have in common, right? They have in common that these are decisive moments, right? These are you have to have JFK has to be decisive in missiles in Cuba, right? The Cuban Missile Crisis, right? These are all where Russia is taking an alpha position with Sputnik, right? So you're also seeing benefits from alpha leadership, and that's what Admiral Loy, James Bolton Loy, experienced in his formative years, among other things. But let's from just to let's say his formative years. If you're making these critical decisions, you saw people and they were given the authority to they weren't hyper questioned and things like this. And typically these decisions turned out well on these very, very large scales for people. So that's something to look at too. So yeah, the video boat lift is phenomenal. Again, it gives context. So this thing, transference dynamic, right? Why I wrote about it in School of Airs. Why would you write about that in a school safety book, Dave? Why? And the reason I wrote about it was that what are we doing today with youth? What does their culture look like? The culture they live. So down the road, like how are they going to respond to crisis situations collectively, right? How are they going to respond to those? And I think it's interesting to look at the response to the pandemic and how. So again, this is a whole population, but we've been kind of taught the last number of years, right? Work collectively, do these things and whatever, and the some aspects that didn't show up, that didn't manifest in the pandemic necessarily. We had this whole essential, non-essential stuff, but we didn't have these really decisive kind of alpha positions, which would have been like, we're doing a fitness campaign, because fitness increases immunity, and immunity, it helps you prevent right, getting sick or lessens the effects if you do get sick, because people measure that, right? And I wrote about that in Velocity of Information. You can write about, you can talk about a fitness campaign in March or April of 2020, but you're also going to have people say, I'm not into that, right? I think you're excluding people if you do that. I mean, state of California a number of schools are removing phy ed for students. So when you talk about fitness and exercising, and that wasn't a part of any of the thinking, right, of that type of thinking on 9/11, or earlier as Admiral Loy had worked in his career. So this kind of collective thinking, trying to make a decision, trying to make a decision that appeases a lot of people, slows down the response process. And the thing is, you can slow down your response process, but you can't slow down the crisis. And chaos is completely unpredictable. It doesn't scale linearly, but you can slow down your response if you go to like a consensus response and you're measuring, oh, will people be offended? Will people not be included into these things? And it's dangerous because this, which is the crisis, that timeline doesn't change. That still happens. So as you're trying to maneuver these other things, these variables, these constructs that really aren't part of organically what's going on, this is going on, and you're more at risk because you're not swift and decisive in your decision making. So, anyone, have thoughts on that? What do you think? I'm going to pause and go through the chat here, but yeah, what do you think about that? I think I think 9/11 was as big, with decision making and being decisive as it was with anything else. I 100% believe that. So, let me go over here to the chat, and it is Corey. So all right. Arvero. Hey buddy. By the way, we are up we're closing in on watch hours to get the show monetized. So that's good news. So I'm trying to absorb the description. So Corey, yeah. So actually, if you go in the show description, I took an excerpt out of the book to kind of give some body to this, to give some context to this. So, but yeah, I appreciate you, Corey. So appreciate you, Solitude. Yeah, I know you've commented. I appreciate all your support with my work. You seem to be very apprised of all the stuff that I've got going on out there. So appreciate that. So yeah, let's go back and so it's again, it's this book, School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, but there's several chapters. Let me go back. When I wrote this book, the working title on this book was Lessons of Lower Manhattan, which is a chapter. That was the working title until this book was approved for publication. My publisher said, well, we think Lower Manhattan, right? It's going to be a little too obscure for people to link that to safety. And then it's kind of regional, right? East Coast, New York City. So we switched the title to School of Errors, which was a play off of Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors. And Comedy of Errors was, where everybody knew what they were doing was wrong, and but they were still doing it anyway, right? So it's this big thing of these compounding missteps, right? That are missteps, and then kind of where it leads you. And that's what happens in school safety a lot. People doing a lot of stuff, fortifying environments doesn't really end up making them safer. But then instead of just a window film, now they do like updated cameras and bollards and all that. So that's where we kind of settled on the title. But yeah, so transference dynamic. So why did 500,000 people go down to Battery Park? What was that all about? So here is, if I can bring this up. So let me move to just a second here. Share. Dun, 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 dun. Share screen. Okay. So this is from American Maritime Partnership.com. And there, of course, is modern day New York Battery Park Financial District. And here's, a number of tugboats. And so this article, September 8th, 2001, Admiral James Loy on heroic American maritime 9/11 rescues. So let me do that and click that out here and put that so you can read more about that. But yeah, so here's kind of your visual, right? So this area here is lower Manhattan, your financial district. World Trade Center would be kind of back here. And this largely is kind of seawall that became rescue area. And there were, areas for ferries to come in and transport people, but it was kind of done at regional or at hubs because then you'd want to get off, be able to get on the subway. Like you wouldn't have this whole area where you'd just be able to dock right and get off because you have to get off and, get to a transit area. But this isn't 9/11 2001, but this image, in critiquing this image, this is very well proportioned image to show you, the financial districts. You can get an idea for the boats. This is also probably similar to what it would have been like on 9/11 because for weather, it was a perfect day. 80 degrees, sunny, very low wake in the harbor. So you would have had a good sight line for the boats, to work with too. And so this is pretty representative of that. So let's go back. So, yeah. Wow. So let's go over to, all right. Your camera is reversing the text. Yeah, that's is it okay? Let me do a test here. If I do this, the text should be normal. All right. And let me see if it shows up on my monitor screen. And I don't think it does. Oh, man, my background is flipped. I don't know how that happened. So it will show up over here though on the right. No, yeah. So somehow my background got flipped with this. So that's interesting how that happened, but I can't do anything with it at the moment. So but I might be able to. Let me try one thing. So dun, 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 dun. There's a chance. All right. Let's try that. Sounds like I have an echo. All right. I went back and I flipped it the other way. How about now? School of Airs, Rethinking School Safety America. How does this look? So this looks good. So yeah, things aren't. So yeah, I've got to go back and somehow StreamYard was flipping that. So, well, that's disheartening. That's not good. So, all right. So we go back into the transference dynamic, right? Transference dynamic. Fine point fodder. So thanks for thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Thanks for Monday night. Tomorrow night I have Graham Wilson, our pilot, and aviation trainer from Canada is going to be on the show. That will be a great show. That's tomorrow night. Safety Doc 186. Ready of the blog post written for that one. So yeah, I've got to figure out. There's something goofy with StreamYard and flipping the screen, but let me go back into comments. It's human nature. I fully believe it's low IQ behavior. So tell me more about that. So remember, people lower Manhattan, these are people with degrees in finance and real estate. the majority of people who were rescued, the majority of the 500,000. Now, these are the studies by the Department of Planning, Lower Manhattan, the forensic studies after the event. People that held degrees, at least bachelor's, if not higher, also were working, in finance and real estate, living in a big, metro area. So that participate in this rescue. So the side camera is okay. So, all right, gotcha. It's Vanessa Kitty. Hey, Vanessa, welcome to the show. Welcome. So, yeah, all right. And Samantha P is here. Welcome, Samantha P. So, evening, Kitty and chat. Thank you for being here. I haven't seen you here before. At least I don't think so. If you haven't subscribed to the show, please consider doing that. By the way, this is my wall, which was recently painted, and that's the kind of wall that I had updated. It used to have like shelves and stuff, and that's original art from New Mexico in the 1960s. And so those oil paintings is really cool. It's just a really nice effect on that wall. So that's why I wanted to have the camera, which is my old Samsung 8 phone, shooting this way across. So yeah. How does it happen? So mirror image. Yeah, there's something on StreamYard that I have clicked that says mirror image that does that. So I have to fix it. So I had to undo it in UCam 10, which is the video program that I'm using to work through this. The UCam 10 stuff allows me to do stuff like this. Dun, 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 hey, or on the side screen, like right here, allows me to do stuff like this. The thumbs up thing. So yeah, let me get back to here. And Arvero saying perfect. There you go. Good. Well, we got these things figured out. Corey is saying, hey, when I was in Scouts, I was very young. I'm going to help. So being in Scouts, Corey, thanks for mentioning that. So like if you grew up, you were in Scouts, right? That would be an experience that would be in your formative years. Like you'd be going back probably, if you're in a crisis situation, to some of the things that you learned during scouting, right? Especially if you were out trying to do some, kind of survival camping or whatever, and to earn some patches and things. You might go back to that if it had a big enough imprint on you. Now, a lot of things we do they don't have an imprint on us, but the 1980s, for example, was really designed to be an imprint on us. Again, going back to Rocky IV and all of our media, Nana and Sting and just the ABC with the day after movies. So yeah. Spambot saying my comment was about quackers trying to get a good look at disaster scenes. Oh, gotcha, buddy. Yeah. And that was a weird thing with. Not a weird thing, but that's a unique thing with Lower Manhattan, right? People weren't going to Lower Manhattan. The island was shut off. Let's say the island of Lower Manhattan, right? Manhattan itself was shut off. You couldn't go in. All the roads, bridges, everything, they were closed. So you weren't having people coming in. No one wanted to come in, right? Because this was believed to still be an ongoing event. Tower 7 didn't fall until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So different than other situations where there might be a disaster, and then when the disaster is decisively concluded, people start to flow in to the area to observe. Pretty common in my state for tornadoes, right? A tornado hits an area, no one's there. When it hits, they're all out of the way, but the next day they want to see where the F4 tornado hit, right? They drive there. And also, there are sometimes, I don't see them as much as I did, even 10 years ago, where they'd say, hey, like, be a part of, the cleanup crew. So show up at whatever staging areas and, we'll have transport, we'll get you in and bring, boots and gloves and help us out. Those types of things. So it is Chad Elkins, our good friend from Chicago. Chad Elkins with the Elkins Hour, a very successful podcast, very informative. So appreciate everything that Chad Elkins does in the CPA world and the CPA equals MVP equals awesome world. Chad Elkins, everybody, the Elkins Hour. Wow. So Chad was a guest on the show. I want to bring him back on the show. I have a few topics in mind. But yeah, for your CPA MVP, Chad Elkins in Chicago. All right. One of the things, if Soldier Field is no longer home to the Bears, it might be home to Elkins Accounting. So, with capacity for 58,000 people, with Speed Express returns, you have to have all your stuff in order. Everything. Be ready. Be ready. Chad Elkins. So, Opera Limitum. People seem to struggle with basic blizzards. Now, I think the response would not go as good now, 21 years later. I believe that. And I publicly stated that. And I don't think the response would go as well. I think you'd have to be much more overt, as again, having, drones overhead of telling people, where to go, and I don't know how you maneuver dynamic signage or things like that, or text. It's really text message. That's where people are going, right? People are going to their phone. But are you telling people to go to the harbor, right? And then it's the whole who's got your back thing. And I talked about that yesterday at length with my new superintendents. These are like, brand new superintendents. They're great people, but they're new into this position. And I spent a lot of time yesterday, 8 hours, spent a lot of time and we keep coming back to themes and saying, if who has your back, whether it goes right or wrong or whatever, again, you are making high stakes decisions. The buck stops with you in the moment, and there could be fallout. It could be a decision that gets you the outcome you thought you'd get, or a different outcome that's acceptable, or an outcome that's not acceptable, right? But you have to have the ability to make a decision. Basically, your organization puts you in that leadership role. And as I kept telling people, and some people are like, I don't know if I want to do this job then, and stuff like that. I said, well, nobody's perfect in real time. Nobody is perfect in real time. People will expect to be perfect, but nobody's perfect in real time in any industry, even emergency responders. You work with the information you have. Now, emergency responders is a little different because you're training for a number of things. So you also lean on your training to get you through, but nobody's perfect in real time. Everything's laminated to time and context. So, but make a decision, and make a firm decision. I wrote about that in School of Errors. It shows up kind of in the velocity of information. You have to be decisive. You have to set the corner. Primacy. We'll talk about that tomorrow night with Graham Wilson. And he said, we're talking, we had a couple of calls to do some prep for the show. And he said, one of the things he remembers, right, is his flight instructor telling him, if you feel you have to call an emergency to the tower, a light is on, your alternator is not working, something funky is happening with the plane, you're not sure, then you just say, I've gone through my checklist. There could be a hazard here that I can't get this resolved. Boom, I'm calling an emergency. Not that you're like, oh, if I call it, then, the fire trucks will be out on the runway and it's this big hassle, and maybe it wasn't anything at all. Nope. If it's not making sense, right? And, you are trained in this, you're a pilot, and what, that you've gone to check the checklist, this isn't making sense. Call the emergency to the tower. And that's it. They'll come out and, they'll prepare if they need to assist you. And if not, afterwards, there is a debriefing. You learn from, okay, this is what happened. And then they also, evaluate the response. And, that's it. You're not getting punished. You're not also getting a bill of saying, oh, here you are, for participating in the rescue. I'm not sure. I think the mentality in 2001 of people coming in, when Admiral Loy says come in and do a rescue, people are also thinking, well, there's a split second where someone's like, if I rescue with my tugboat and something doesn't go right, somebody gets hurt, it was the government, it was this official who told me to participate in the rescue. So I have some defense there. And there's some law of necessity, right? I might have to break some maritime rules, whatever, with distances and procedures and stuff to pull off these rescues. But Admiral Loy set the corner. And if there's a split second, right? If things don't go right, I was told to do this by, that to use my discretion in the situation. And you don't have to worry, am I going to be sued, or if, all this stuff. And we get into that so much today. Would captains go or this? I just don't want to I don't want to be a part of this because what if somebody falls as they're trying to get in my boat and they sue me, right? And who is the person who's the Admiral Loy today? That's my question. Who's your Admiral Loy today? Who gets on maritime radio and says, if you have a boat, you can come down, do the rescue, do it. So that's one. Who's your Admiral? Who sets the corner? Who's your alpha to do that? And the other is the transference dynamic. Do people trust in kind of a government or this organizer, their fellow mankind to do this? Or, their first response is going to go to the phone, right? And they're going to use the phone to try to inform what they do as their next move. And so you're going to have 500,000 people working very independently, not collectively. So they're not all going down to the Battery Park. I mean, there's this deep thing in us, if there are 500 people running down the street past my house and it looks like they're running from something, my tendency would be to watch that and maybe like, I need to join in on that. Like where are they running from? Is there something that's happening, right? So you would have that aspect, but people weren't running to Battery Park. People were walking to Battery Park. And when they got there, they waited, and then the lines got deeper and the boats came in. So, this is important to talk about with your family, right? With those close to you. What is it? The movie San Andreas, like with The Rock, nothing like this, but in that movie where his daughter said, "Oh, we have to get to the high point because of, if there's a tsunami, right, the higher land is going to be better, and the landlines will still be connected," which in the movie they were. But there is something to that of telling people, this is, I don't, right. But with that said, right, you might be going to the harbor and expecting this rescue, and other people aren't, and it's not your job to convince other people. It's a scary time. No one practiced for this too, right? This organically developed because of these transference dynamic, the transference dynamic. And let me give you another example of transference dynamic in just a second here. It's Heath. Hey, Heath. Hi, buddy. Thank you, everybody, for also getting more watch hours. We are closer than ever to 4,000, which is the magic number for monetization. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. We're good with that, but that always helps. So thank you very much. Samantha saying to Corey, so cool your dad did judo and that mom was interested in outdoors, even if it was clearly their things, you make them your own. I'm sure it had downsides, but it seems cool. That does seem cool. So, yeah. Vanessa saying, I was always out in the woods with my brothers growing up. That is transference dynamic, right? That will influence, if you're in an unfamiliar setting today, or, in the woods also, if we really get deep into transference dynamic, right, Vanessa, a lot of time in the woods, you're navigating uneven areas and spatial and distance and things. These are just good skills and awareness that transfer maybe into settings and where those are kind of replicated down the road for you, unfamiliar settings. So it's good. Corey is saying, even though YouTube hates a lot of my friends, I still love it. I don't know where I would be if it weren't for the other voices in the chat. Hey, thanks. Well, I appreciate that. Corey, yeah, I mean, I have 185 episodes. And tomorrow, Graham Wilson, who is phenomenal, will be a guest on the show. So that episode will be out there. And then I did the 2 PBS presentations on school safety. They're great presentations. They're more school safety themed. If you just type in my name plus PBS, they're out there. But yeah, go back. We're talking about 9/11. I asked Larry Lawton on this show. Larry Lawton, America's biggest jewel thief. He has 1.5 million YouTube followers. Where were you when you found out about the attack on the towers? And then also when they shut down the prisons, you couldn't have any visitors. How did you figure out what was happening? Like, it was a whole country marching toward war. And so I had a friend of mine, a classmate of mine from high school, went into the Navy right out of high school. So this is back in 1990, the Iraq War. is happening, right? So, um, and he is in San Diego during his training, like when he first enlist, and he tells the story, right? So you're not getting mail back in 1990. You have very limited exposure to what is happening outside. A very very limited like TV time. There's no cell phones, no popping on a computer. So when you're in training, you're pretty isolated from time stops for you, right? So he said during the night, like 1, 2 in the morning, someone runs in and they're yelling and banging on a garbage can lid and whatever. Get up, and like we're being invaded. And so he thought, and everybody else, right, thought that the U.S. was being invaded, like California is being invaded. So he's like, so whoever was came in, said, you have to get out and get on a chopper, and we're going to get you out to some boats, right? Whatever. Just that's a quick information. So this is all actually a drill for the Navy to rescue people from the ocean, right? So, but the participants had no idea that this is happening. These new recruits. So he said, he's just grabbing stuff. He's quickly on a plane, on a helicopter. They fly him out a mile or two, right, and they drop him in the ocean. And they're just told, like, there'll be a boat, they're going to pick you up. Like, we're trying to get as many people out as we can. And so he's actively thinking, right, like, we're being invaded, they're trying to get us out of here, so maybe we get some position to combat this, like from sea and whatever. And then once they brought him up and they had him and finally got everybody back, then they said it was a drill. But the whole time it happened, for like hours, he had no idea, and everybody around him, like, they genuinely thought this was an invasion. So but yeah, so let's see. Samantha said people weren't as too happy back then, 2001, as it was common that the government would commandeer stuff, local town, or count on local towns people for emergency, or count on local towns for emergency services. Absolutely. So thank you for writing that, Samantha. And Samantha's spot on with this, right? This is 100% on the mark. People measure their decisions nowadays, especially leadership positions. People measure their decisions. What do I have to gain? What do I have to lose is the question. Linda Stone talked about this in my book, The Velocity of Information. And Linda Stone talked about this, right? People are different today. And that was, we were talking 2020, 2021. What do I have to lose is the first question that comes in your mind, not what do I have to gain? And it is, right? Can you be sued? So Samantha, yesterday when I was working with my new superintendents in class, we had a case study where a boy with autism wanders, and he wanders into private property. It's wooded and it's marked trespassing. And, do you send your staff to go there? And the soups would say, well, if they want to, like, I wouldn't require them to. If they want to volunteer to be on the search, okay. But so now they're volunteering, but they're also trespassing, right? Because and this is before emergency responders get there. It's a rural area, and so this is just a scenario, right, where this plays out. Do you say go and participate? Find this kid. We're going to split up. We're going to do whatever. And so you've just told them to break the law, right? So now they're trespassing. And what if they get sued what if your district gets sued? What if you get sued for trespassing? What if this person breaks a leg, right? Or has some issue, and then can they sue the district because, they've never been trained to go out there. The woods was dangerous. They didn't have the appropriate shoes, and that there wasn't, and so these things slow people down. But then I always stop and say, in the moment, what was the decision you had to make? The decision was the kid's gone. Here's the resources you have. Here's the decision you make. Laminated context of time. It's reasonable person. Now, yeah, could you get burned on this? You never know how a fact finder, a judge or a jury, right, or a DA or whatever is going to take this. The flavor of where they want to go with these things is all over the board. But It is, would a reasonable person, saying somebody who's in a leadership role, would they say, you go out there and, you're try to find the student, like stay within sight distance of the other rescuers, right? So you can all see each other, but you don't have time to coach them on all of these things. And if someone obviously isn't capable or doesn't want to participate in that rescue, um, then give them a different role. Okay, be in the school, keep the kids going, or be over here to start staging the responders. Or if parents show up, like don't let them into the scene, area of take their, whatever you have to do, right? You have different roles for people, and not everyone is going to either want to participate. Some people are just going to have to say you're going to participate in this, right? That's another thing, is someone who is deemed fully capable of participating in this, but they're like, well, I don't want to do that because that's private property. And then I don't know if the school's got my back, or I don't know if you got my back. You're asking me to break the law. I'm not, and some of this is like, then, right, you take a strong position on that. Yeah, because are you deeming that person going and participating in this rescue, as you've already called 911, you have, sources coming, that there is a greater harm to them, an adult participating in this rescue, in this wooded area, than if the student continues to be lost. And there's a scenario, there's a river in this area too. We know from, I don't have the book here, lost person behavior, students with autism who've wandered toward machinery and also wandered toward bodies of water. So some of this is very, again, you have to be very swift and decisive and convincing and strong in your decision making. And I told, the students, I said, there should be a policy in each of your districts, or at least a statement from your Board of Education saying that our staff are afforded the professional discretion to act in the best interest of students and staff, laminated to context and time, something to that effect. And everyone was like, well, we've never seen anything like that. I'm like, nobody has that. I said, there should be, right? All your organizations should be doing this. And I said, we will do this in class. We will write a policy to do that. Because I said, your district has a million other things that they do of policy statements, or like of just statements by the Board of Education, or like, we are a welcoming district of, whatever that kind of goes in with their non-discrimination. But you need to have this, because people, if they're not told, if they don't believe that the organization has their back, when you get into situations, they are going to hesitate, or they're going to stall. Or if they've had something bad happen in the past, we're talking about the transference dynamic. People who grew up in the 90s, right, in 2000s as kids, they weren't going to Sandlot baseball like the 9/11 crowd was, right? People show up and you just kind of figure out a game and there's no adults there and whatever. They had everything structured for them, and specific rules and specific, accommodations. Oh, if you swung and hit the tee like the first time, you still get to go on base. And so they are used to operating in very structured environments outside of themselves, right? Versus these environments being structured by them, by their input. Again, think of that group, 1980s Sandlot baseball. You have a group of kids show up, right, and you figure out, who's going to play what positions, what's fair to break up teams, what are the specific rules, and and that's what you do. But that wasn't the way it was in the 90s and the 2000s, right? So, so this all comes into transference dynamic. But yeah, and again, it's litigation. I saw that go away for a while with my administrators. I've been teaching for 19 years at the university level, over 100 classes. And now it's back. People definitely are looking at that. And it's interesting because you have a very high level of immunity as a school administrator. If you believe you're acting in the best interest, you have a very high level of immunity. So that is, meaning like it's unlikely you're going to be, if you are sued, it's unlikely that you would be found at fault, right? For what you're doing. Like you're acting within the capacity of your job. And that's where to actually be very bold, right? And to send staff out on a rescue where you're into private property, that is more likely to go against probably a lot of board policies than to align with it, where the board policy might be wait for the emergency responders and let them tell you what to do. But again, like it's a rural setting, and we have 421 school districts here. A lot of them are very, very small, like 400 students. And the one soup in my class said, Dave, what you're describing here is exactly my district, right? We have a K-12 building, and it's 8 miles down the road to the next kind of populated area. 8 miles down the road to the next populated area is like we have a woods in the back. And, the county, I think, has 2 police patrolling at any time. And if there's an accident, they're probably both involved in it. So yeah, and like in the northern part of my state, the fire departments, the mutual aid is very limited too, because mutual aid is if you have a fire and you need the other area departments to come out and help you, for so you have more firefighters, right, to rotate in or more equipment. These rural districts in the northern part of the state, they're like, we don't have that, so like, and if we can't take our one $600,000 fire engine and drive it 30 miles somewhere else, because if we have a fire here, we have an obligation. People pay their fire insurance and stuff. And it used to be that way actually back in, the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Your fire department stayed in town. If there was a fire in the country, the truck didn't leave town, or the 2 trucks, they didn't leave town. They stayed in town. Town paid for it. So let me go over here to the chat. So yeah, transference dynamic, and we're going to drill that home a little bit more here. So here we go. Samantha, in my mother's original deed from the 1800s, G is required as a landowner to participate in specific given voluntary services. I believe it also says something about purchasing a town building to vote. Wow, that's amazing. I love that historical stuff. So thanks for sharing that, Samantha. That is cool. Corey, sorry, Sam, I didn't see that. It was my thing, but Mom pulled my brother and I. Spambot, to Corey. Many folks I watched on YouTube 5 years ago and now on alt tech only. So yeah, Safety podcast started, I don't know, 5 years ago. Safety PhD. Every show I've ever done is there, and audio, video is YouTube, audio is Podbean, and then there's a blog post. So Samantha to Corey. Whoa, Corey. Woo. That's even crazier. She got that involved for something that was your thing. Sounds like you had an awesome family. So, all right, you guys. This is Heath. Heath is saying, hey, I lived in Sky Harbor Airport and couldn't sleep for a week because I go to bed with the sound of jets landing every other minute, and it was whisper quiet. Oh my goodness. Wow. So Samantha saying, understandable, but then again, there's always been thinkers and doers. Yeah, absolutely. There have been thinkers and doers. I think right now, the doers are having, the doers still do, right? We still have Cajun Navy relief. If there's a hurricane that strikes Florida, Louisiana, Texas, Navy and all of that. But you're having to measure, I think, more because of the, not just the litigation, just that the people in charge, your government officials, your fact finders, your local district attorney, like that they'll have your back because they used to some extent have your back if you were doing the right thing, the law of necessity, right? Which is something, right? And now Lisa Lenny will be a guest on the show. We'll talk about law of necessity. And I just don't believe that's as strong anymore. Like you could do everything right, technically kind of right, and still a judge would say no, like you did this, and I don't know, it's weird. I think some lines were crossed, March of 2020, when we had the websites that the cities were putting up saying, hey, like, if there's a group of 5 people gathering, submit a photo for COVID violations. I have that video, right? So, and let's take so like that was a big breach of trust. Maybe that picture though was someone who went out and bought food for other people, and in that moment they were distributing that food to the other people. They went out and took the hazard so the other people didn't have to. Like, there's no context to that, right? You don't know. But yet a judge sees it and it's like, oh, here's 5 people. It looks like they're in close proximity and you're fined. So really weird. But yeah, I mean, thinkers and doers. I believe, we were much more of a society that would vindicate and celebrate people who acted in the best interest. And I think that's less so. It doesn't mean, right, that we wouldn't act in the best interest, but I think there's a different likelihood that we'd have consequences today. So let me show that video real quick. It's 45 seconds, so let's do that. The Bellevue, Washington, right? Yeah, let's watch this. Hi, everybody. This is the Safety Doc with a face validity check-in here on March 31st, 2020. Bellevue, Washington has started a tool to report stay-home violations. This is from the government website in Bellevue, Washington. So we're going to scroll down here to My Bellevue portal and then to report gatherings. They've made it convenient. There's a map on the right. You can drag a location over here into address, write a description, and then also include photos. This is a practice we've seen in some areas of the country, but it's going to be more prevalent. Look for it in your area, probably in the next week or two. So, yeah, would we have seen that type of approach in 2020, right? Now, I know different technology and whatever, but would we have seen the local news, saying, hey, like if you have this, call this number, right? And report this, right? So no, like no one would have been doing that back in 2001, right? Versus 2020. So, it's a pretty big shift. So Corey's saying I was 7 or 8. So yeah, man. When I was teaching yesterday, I made a joke and it was something, I said, I remember, these rescues and stuff. I remember when the fire truck wasn't a truck; it was a horse pulling a wagon. And because I'm older than like most people, if not all people, like in my classes now. So yeah. I was in a room too that had some newer technologies. So I'm like, I figured it out. But yeah, like Doc needs a little warm up in there. All right, Samantha's saying our towns are like that. My entire town is 3 miles across for large factory fires or something. The other towns join in. All voluntary towns outside the chief position, perhaps. Yeah, that's what happens here. There's very strong mutual aid. So, but it's not that way in the northern part of the state, and it's not that way because they don't want to be that way. But it is, again, they're very spread out. They only have so many firefighters. And if you send your equipment, your firefighters to help somewhere else, and you can't backfill that, you have a responsibility to your own community, right? People are paying the taxes and the safety of the community. So, you'd have to make sure that you were covered. So yeah. Jordan saying like Thomas the Tank Engine. Dun, 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 dun. Type A personality. Yeah. So thanks for putting this out there, Heath. Admiral Loy, type A, right? Making a decision, being decisive. Chesty Polar, right? Are in the military, right? We're surrounded. Well, that simplifies things, but make a decision. Make a decision. When I teach tabletop exercises to people, the first exercise, the hardest thing to get people to do in a tabletop exercise is to make a decision. So, and we start out with things that are pretty benign. Power's out, right? And it's a school and whatever, and so, so what do you do? Make a decision. Are you going to keep all the kids in the buildings? Are you going to try to get the bus there to get people home? Although like the homes don't have power. Are you going to wait for, but make a decision. Like, whatever you do, make a decision and then move on and make another decision and make another decision, simulated annealing, right? You make a decision, then you inventory your options, and then you make another decision to try to get to a better optimum. On September 11th, this is what that would have looked like for someone at Battery Park who wanted to get off the island. They live, let's see this. So, all right, let's do this. Dun, 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 dun. All right, so they live in, all right, somebody lives in Patterson, New Jersey. All right, so a little bit away from the World Trade Center. They work down in the financial district, right? So they live in Patterson. It's a little bit of a drive, but that's their daily commute. And anyway, the boat that shows up to there's a tugboat, right? And so this person is waiting in Battery Park, and they're like, they made a decision. They're like, I'm going to get off. I'm going to get on a boat. So that's a decision, right? And they're not going to try to wait for a boat that specifically takes them as close as it can to Patterson. They want a boat that just gets them off. That's the decision. I'm on a boat. So now, once they're on the boat and they get brought over to, let's say, like Hoboken, right? Once they're in Hoboken, then they've got to decide, well, what do I do next? Because I want to get up to Patterson. So they have to inventory their decisions, going to be decisive. Like, okay, I'm either going to walk. If there's a cab available, who knows? Like, what if there's a bus? If there's, so they might do that. They might take a bus to somewhere. They might take a cab. They might have, it's what they're going to do to try to get close. Once they get that step, they can be like, okay, I'm up to Elizabeth, which is now pretty close to Patterson, right? So from here, like, I can maybe call some people I know in Patterson, right? And they can come down, although, everything's real chaotic and stuff like that. And we'll meet up at whatever, or I can, take transit, even closer. I can get up toward Newark, which gets me even closer. I mean, or maybe whatever it is, right? But it's this whole thing of simulated annealing, this process of taking steps to get to where you need to go. So in it, you have to have a type A personality. If you don't have a type A personality, you don't move, right? You stay and stall in these situations. Or if you don't have you need a clear alpha personality to tell you to make a corner, to set the corner, right? Somebody has to do that. And again, it was Admiral Loy. Who is it today? Or would it be you? Or who might do that? Is it going to be going on a phone and someone's going to be that? Is it going to be a celebrity? Is it going to be some celebrity who's going to say that? Is it going to be a news person who's just going to, who is going to set the corner? Or are you going to set the corner? People are going to follow you, or who would you follow? And how are you going to vet them, and how are you going to vet them within seconds or minutes? You're going to vet them maybe on, looking at them, like, what do they have with them? What preparedness materials, how confident are they, or are they just, just as lost as everyone else, right? But they're just doing something. So yeah, this is some interesting stuff. So let's go to Corey Slater's. So Boy Scout motto is be prepared. Nothing more cowboy than that. Yeah. Be prepared and make a decision, right? I'll add that in, but right. That's why they had to go. Girl Scouts are still shilling cookies. So this is per Corey. Vanessa, my two careers in military were basically positions to help people. USAF medic and Spectre was the second job. So yeah, thank you, Vanessa, for that. You've done much in your life to contribute to the betterment of others. So yeah, and also, right, with being as a U.S. Air Force medic, you would need to be decisive, and you'd also need to believe, based upon your training, right, and if you made a decision, right, that people had your back. So Jordan is saying, our town is less than a mile and recently just had a brand new fire department built just a block away. It's pretty awesome. So when I was in college, I lived a block away from the fire department, which was out all the time because like they'd be pulling the alarms at the dorms and stuff like that. So let us see here. Hey, it's Ron Wayne. It is our friend Ron Wayne. Ron, I think you had a 1 million view video that had a shout out from Flying Rich. So congratulations to our good friend Ron Wayne. Hey, buddy. Corey is saying, reading survival manuals and like, since I could read, now if a toga party happens, I'm in no shape to implement anything I've learned. Oh, it's another point, right, Corey? So as we talk about rescues and all of these types of, we talk about rescues right now, 9/11. Is the rescue, are you in shape to participate in a rescue? And also has the force had entropy? Have these tugboats and these other boats, have they been maintained, and has a harbor been maintained, and these entropy of systems? And I write about this in the velocity of information with cognitive offloading, saying, we put so much into the cloud thinking if we need it, right, we can go there and get the information, and we don't practice with it. And imagine like a fire engine, right? A brand new fire engine, and it's in the station. It's kept up really well, but over the years, right? If you're not practicing using the fire truck, the fire engine, and you actually are called in to use it, you open up the fire door and you go out, and it's like, oh, I didn't realize that the size of the hydrants changed, the couplings have changed. That doesn't match the truck, right? Oh, I didn't realize that now there are electric cars, and putting water on an electric car from one truck, 1,000 gallons of water isn't going to put it out. And, I didn't realize there's GPS navigation all of these things that change, like these static, and how do you use it then? So you have to practice with these devices. And also, like, are you, as you kind of said, like, do you have the skills? Like the new fire engine, like the one that was delivered in my town, has a compartment on the side, and you open it up and the drone is in there. The drone, the fire department, the truck's drone, just the way that it is. And there's a LED screen. So as whoever is there flying the drone to get, apprised of the scene, they have to know how to fly the drone, right? So that's part of the training, but that wouldn't have been part of the training years ago. So yeah. And you can only do so much, right? But there were people who were rescued on 9/11 who were elderly and disabled, like a lady who had a seeing eye dog she was lifted overhead and put onto a boat, and so was the dog. So, the system came together and the system worked. And I do think organically, if a lot of times systems will come together, right? If there's a disaster, a crisis, people respond and help each other out. The transference dynamic played a big part in that. When we were growing up, we probably saw that happening in, the 70s and 80s, and the younger the generations before that saw that happening. Do we see it happen as much today? If there is something that happens in an area, a natural disaster event or something, let's say something like that, right? Are we seeing people coming there and doing the rescues? I guess, yes, Cajun Navy relief and that. I don't know if we see it as, we don't see it as much anymore. Let me stop fence sitting, because I've been doing that too much in the show, and it sticks in when I pause when I say it and I don't like it. Like, I don't think or whatever. No, we don't have that. We don't have as much of that. And it needs the cornerstone needs to be set, and the government needs to back up people, and people need to back up other people, right? And that's where I can see this whole thing, and that's why Lisa's going to be on the show with the law of necessity, right? You do things because it's the best thing to do in the moment, although it might not go with all of the stuff that's lined up in the law, right? I had a trespass in order to participate in rescue to possibly find a child with autism, right? But you trespassed. So Leto's Law, if you have listened to Leto's Law, that's a good podcast. So Steve Leto talked about law of necessity and had a scenario where it was a 16-year-old boy had his driver's license, and it was night, and you had to be in by 10 o'clock per the license, when you're 16. So he's out, it's before 10 o'clock, and he's, I guess, coming home, and he's seeing somebody swerving all over the road. And he calls 911 and says, there's this person in front of me. They're swerving all over, and I think they're dangerous. And the 911, dispatcher says, okay, like, continue to follow them and stay on the phone with me and tell me like what they're doing. We're dispatching police. So it gets to be like, after 10 o'clock, and the police are there, and they pull this person over, and they actually arrest them for drunk driving. And they go back to this 16-year-old who pulls over also. And the police, it's kind of this thing of, thanks for following, and here's your ticket because you're out past 10 o'clock. Because that actually happens. So Steve has a show on this. Lato's laws, you've seen him, Corey. Yeah. So, and so this kid's like, well, what's the deal? Like, I'm helping you out. And the dispatcher told me, and it's like, well, you'll have your day in court, I guess. Right. So when this 16-year-old goes to court, he tells the judge, I was supposed to do this. Right. And so it's kind of like entrapment, saying they're telling you to break the law, the dispatcher. And the other thing was a law of necessity. The 16-year-old being out at 10:15 was much less of an offense versus like, had he not been out there to help police locate this drunk driver who could have, hit another car and killed people. And the driver could have been killed. So like, and the judge said, and the only thing that the police officer said initially was, I ticketed this person for being out after their curfew time on their license, right? And then nothing about like, this was a drunk driver, and then the 16-year-old had asked the judge, could you ask the police officer to tell you about the person they pulled over? And then so the judge is like, did you pull over? What was the condition of the person? And they said, we tested them, and they had, like a 1.4 blood alcohol level. And then the judge said, listen, like, to the 16-year-old, you're free to go. All this is dropped, right? It's a law of necessity and things like that. But again, as things might not always play out like that. But I was like, yes, rational thinking. Thank you so much, Judge. So tornado response, Heath, has to be a hard one. Yeah. And a tornado response is also a lot of people coming in and how you coordinate that. And we talked about that yesterday in class. So teenagers in New Mexico, like high schoolers, but teens, right? They're trained in what's called Teen CERT Community Emergency Response Team, but specifically teenagers. And the FEMA comes in and teaches them, here's what to do if there's basically like a tornado or something like that, how to participate in a rescue. So they have them do that, and they're outside and they're doing this. Here's what to do if you're in a car that's flipped over, or you come up upon a car, that's been in an accident. Here's what to do. How to crib a vehicle, all these things, how to use a fire extinguisher, aim at the base, and they give a fire extinguisher and put out fire. And so that was a variable we had in the case study of saying, okay, your high school principal calls you and says, I've got students who went through the CERT training. They can be over there helping with your rescue. They'll be like in 10 minutes. Do you say yes or no to that, to your high school principal? And, so it's funny because it's a yes or no question. So I have people fill out a piece of paper and then I collect it. So you don't have to be seeing what other people do. And half the students would write like yes, but then they would have like these conditions underneath yes, but after I've talked to the superintendent, or yes, after like this person is given whatever, and I'm like, okay, but you can't do this. Like it has to be a yes or an, I know what you're doing. And I get it. Like I would have done probably the same thing or similar, right? If I was in your role taking this class, but you can't have these conditional statements. You have to either say yes or no, and it moves from there. So when it's a conditional statement, there's yes and a conditional statement and no. And so next time I do this, like I'm going to tell people it's a yes or a no. You cannot write anything else on there. Somebody found like a loophole in that, like what was the thing with Star Trek 2 and the Kobayashi Maru or whatever that was, right? The where they found a loophole in it. But Captain Kirk did. So stone's throw from Sask. Wow. Sask. So yeah. Samantha, that's a tough one because it's children involved, and then you also have to deal with all of the parents. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So things are meant to be hard. So you get used to making decisions during complex situations, right? And be confident in your decision making. And I spend time, and you didn't have to do that a lot with this 9/11 rescue, right? You did not have people coming back and grilling everybody that participated in it. There's actually not a lot that's known about the boats and the captains and the crews. There's a list of boats that participated, like 150 about, but there's more that participated that just weren't. There was never a registry, and then afterwards, I think there was a effort. Hey, if you participated, let us know so I could try to be more comprehensive as they were trying to put this data set together. Maybe some people participate and they're like, no, I just don't want to be recognized for it. Or at this stage, no, like maybe there's some reason if I participated, like there'll be more scrutiny. Who knows? But yeah, it is very, very strange. So yeah. Jordan said, my house faces west and I always get the snow blowing directly in. My house faces west too. So yeah, we haven't had a blizzard here for a while, like 5 years. But when I worked in northern Wisconsin, one of my first jobs, like 30 years ago, there was so much snow and like these recurrent blizzards. My window was on the first floor and the snow was between the first and second floor of the building. It was beyond the first floor. I had a west facing office. I look out my windows, there was just snow. The snow was easily 4 to 6 feet above my windows. And, you'd go out in your car, the snow would be drifted all the way up to the trunk of your car. So, you'd have to shovel it away. And yeah, so it's kind of stuff you did back then. Corey, my apartment faces north and west. So facing west is kind of nice at night for the sunset. My garage, my concrete when I'm out there on my chair. So that's a plus. Samantha's saying, yeah, but a bunch of people that decided to participate that day, 9/11 became Sue happy. All right. Well, tell me more about that, I guess. I didn't see it in the harbor rescue, and I was working on that like years afterwards of looking at forensically on stuff. The harbor event didn't have any Sentinel litigation with it at all. And so specific to the harbor event didn't have that with it. And it could have, certainly could have been related to the towers, but yeah. So let's see. This is Jordan. I remember winters like that too, Doc. Yeah. Yeah. The day I took my driver's test, it was a day school was canceled because of a blizzard. And strangely enough, the driver's test office was still open. And it was in the next town over, which was bigger. I just live in a tiny town. And so I called and they said, oh, everybody canceled. But there was like a guy who was there. And he's like, well, if you make it over here, like we can go do the test. And I had a rear drive 1984 Pontiac Bonneville, the V8 engine, and went and it was just very difficult to make it over there because you're driving through this horrible storm and I got stuck going into the parking lot. The door like froze shut on the passenger side. And this guy had to be like 70 years old and he was just super cool. And so like I had to kick his door open from inside the car. And I think I had to slam it a few times so it actually would lock, or he had to slam it a few times because otherwise the latch was froze. So like, we can do this test, but you have to like hang onto the door and keep it closed while we do it. And so you just knew like this shouldn't have been happening. But there was also this part where this guy's like, I've been through everything, and I had driven in winterish type, weather, to get my temp license and things. And, but we went out and we weren't out long, and we were on an on-ramp or an off-ramp. I don't remember. And suddenly the Bonneville started to do a slow 360, and we ended up faced in the correct direction, didn't go in the ditch or anything. And this guy looks at me and he said, "Oh, you did a really good job of like handling that, and not like, he goes, but why don't we just kind of go back?" And I'm like, "Oh God, I failed." So we go back and we're in the car, and then but then things changed. He said, "Hey, like, how much practice have you done?" I said, "A lot, I've done a lot." And he goes, "So if you were to parallel park, like, which way would you turn your wheels? It turn this way." And it's just some other questions. And he said, I'm passing you, and congratulations." So I'm like, "Hey, thanks, buddy." And we also left, and he said, "Hey, like, turn the radio. Is it okay if do you want the radio on?" And I didn't have it on. And it was a day, I think Forrest Gregg, the coach of the Packers, was either fired or hired. I think it was when he was fired. And the guy was trying to get some like info on that. But it's a strange thing. But I'm thankful, man. I don't today, right? Stuff like that wouldn't happen, but old school. Oh, Smith saying not the harbor rescue. Yeah, right. Sorry. And I'm sorry I didn't communicate back on that. But the harbor rescue of 500,000 people in 9 hours, really, there was never any Sentinel litigation around that event. So, and again, this was years after I was, when I was with the New York State planning, and, it's all written in School of Airs of this rescue. So yeah, which is amazing, too, that happened. So, what are some things to take from this, right? So, right, our anniversary of 9/11. One, Admiral Loy, Coast Guard Admiral Loy, getting on maritime radio and saying, if you have a boat, you can come down to Lower Manhattan, Battery Park area, participate in a rescue, do it. Boom, that's it. No further directions. And that set the corner. And then you are authorizing, right, people to do that. Then you set up your Delta Force. You're the Alpha. He's not there. He actually wasn't in New York at the time this happened. He was apprised of it. He sent that order down. You set up the Delta Force then, who are there were a number of, fire and police and Coast Guard there, but not enough to do this rescue by far. So you set up your Delta Force. And your Delta Force, right, are people who have their tugboats and their private boats and their ferry boats, and they're coming in because they believe you've got your back, and you've just told them what to do, and they're going to go do it. So that's your Alpha, and now your Delta team falls into place. These people have never drilled together. They have no idea what to expect when they pull up. But as far as like, will the boats in front of them move in and out in an orderly manner? How far do they stage back? What if something else is happening? But it works, right? So Admiral Loy making a decision that's very simple and doesn't have these ancillary steps to it, right? Go there, but stage in this area, and then wait for direction from none of that stuff. Make a decision, right? The other part is, remember that in Lower Manhattan, this was a dynamic situation. I mean, people who were going to the harbor, Tower 7 didn't fall World Trade Center until 5 o'clock. People believe they were still being attacked as they were being rescued. So as this is still a happening event in the minds of both the rescuers and the rescuees, this is still a live chaos event. It hasn't concluded. So again, tornado comes through and rips everything up. You're largely thinking it's done, right? We're not going to have another tornado. Now, granted, you're going to have all these consequences to deal with of everything mangled up in live power lines and all of that, but you're probably not going to have another tornado coming through like you believe it's a concluded event. So Admiral Loy making a decision. The transference dynamic, how you were raised, your formative years, right? Teens, early 20s for people, what was happening around them really influences when they get into stressful situations, right? So back, if we look at the transference dynamic, 70s, 80s, things like Rocky IV, and I hope the children, it looks like my camera just gave out here. So let me go to, I'm going to hook a battery pack up on that one tomorrow though, to keep it going, my side camera. So I will just take, so this is the deal here, the dealio. So just my camera. I didn't have any use for this phone, and the battery, is obviously worn on it. So, but let's go to, let me check, and the battery is at, I don't know, just turned off. But so a little tripod, but yeah, I have an Anchor battery pack that I'll use. So just a second. All right. So our side camera is done for the night. Yeah. So there we go. Chuck Norris and Delta Force. Yeah. But there are terms though, right? And again, I use these terms yesterday, and it's interesting because people haven't heard these terms before, at least not in the context of kind of, the leadership, right? Of you have to have an alpha, and then, what your delta and so your delta forces are supporting your alpha, and a delta could actually become an alpha. So like if you're a principal, but you're not at a building, your teacher in charge could move from delta to, and like people are like, oh, I never thought about it that way. I'm like, well, you have to think about it that way, right? Your discretion. So your delta has to feel that they have the same discretion afforded to the alpha. So let's say at that rural school, if the principal, and this is the way it works a lot of times in these small schools, principal might be there half the day, and then they're at another school half the other day in these small rural elementary schools. Like my elementary schools in my district, that's how it works. And when the principal's not there, there's a teacher in charge, someone who's appointed to be like a quasi principal, but they're a teacher in charge. The teacher in charge has to be able to move from that delta position to that alpha. So again, your teacher in charge and that child wanders, you have to be able to make those decisions, and also believe that you have the authority from the alpha to make those decisions. The alpha will have your back. So the whole alpha delta thing and what that looked like. And so, yeah, and the tri-lambs on campus over at Adams College. Anybody get that one? So Admiral Loy, making a decision, right? Transference dynamic. People in 2001 believed there would be a rescue force that would be put together for them, which Admiral Loy pretty much did. He set the tone. The boats are coming in. They're coming in to rescue them. The reality is the boats could have been coming in to get off the water because this was still an ongoing attack, right? This was the perception. But because people believed in the rescue came together. It was easier. The captains didn't have to sell people on getting on the boat. They didn't have to say, hey, get on the boat. Like they put a gangplank down and people will come on the boat, right? So, and then systems develop. You didn't have to practice for 150 boats of where to stage, where to come together, simulated annealing. I can't get all the way back to my house in Jersey City, but I can get to Hoboken. So from Hoboken, maybe I can, take a cab up closer, and from whatever I can walk. Simulated annealing. You can have steps to get to where you have to go, but you have to make a decision and say, I'm going to take a first step. It might not get me to my outcome right away, but it'll get me closer to the outcome. So simulated annealing, right? So those are our big things. And then forensically, everything is laminated to context and time. Everything is laminated to context and time. So you could go back and be critical of the rescue and those things, but right, you'd have to look as a reasonable person. What would a reasonable person have done, or a captain who's coming in with an order, from Admiral Loy, if you can come down and help, So, I sprained my foot on, this gangplank that was really a door and not a Coast Guard approved gangplank. Well, in the moment, like, there wasn't the ability to get these type of gangplanks, and right, there had to be, so it's kind of this law of necessity, right? You're not going by every regulation of it has to be this wide and this much weight and this, it has to have a railing and stuff like that. No, it's a law of necessity. The necessity is to get people off of the island. So we talked about these things: law of necessity, transference dynamic. So Freud, right, the psychiatrist, right, Freud, he talked about transference dynamic and wrote about it. And his take on transference dynamic was that he was, it was a little bit different than what I talked about, but he talked about a part of transference dynamic where when he would work with patients, the patients would eventually just like fall in love with him, like and he couldn't kind of make sense of like why this was happening, right? And he just, assumed he was becoming like a parent figure, or like a father figure for these clients, right, of his. So, but it was some interesting stuff because, he said initially, like, I didn't expect that to happen. I expect to kind of help people out, but then, like, they were falling in love with him. So, but that was where he badged transference dynamic. So, like, where I took transference dynamic right now, how I wrote about it in School of Errors, which if you don't have it, you should buy it. And if you have it, please review it. And also the velocity of information, if you have it, please review it. There's 21 reviews on Amazon. You could be number 22. There's 54 reviews for School of Errors. You could be number 55. This book is on audiobook also that I narrate it, and it's very reasonable. I think you can get it at Downpour for like $10.99, an audiobook for 6 hours. And you can listen to me narrate my book. So I listened to Velocity of Information on my drive yesterday, because my drive to and from is about the 6 hours and 40 minutes of the book. And it was really good. That one was Ben Hawk narrated, but so yeah, these terms, right? Admiral Loy, and check out Boat Lift. Sometimes it's 11 minutes narrated by Tom Hanks. And you'll get a context for what I'm talking about. The fact also, people who want to practice for everything and drill for everything. That's where I got in yesterday with the thing of saying, should you be practicing for a search and rescue at a rural elementary of a student, right? And some people be like, yes, and others would be no, right? Most would be, and I would just say no, unless you have a student who has wandered, right? If that is something that is proclivity of that student, they've, a student with autism, for example, might wander from home, might wander. And so if you know that student has a history of wandering, yeah, then you would practice. You'd have your team together in a procedure. But otherwise, and that's one thing I pointed out in the case study yesterday, I'm like, this has never happened before at this school. So, so then the question coming out, well, you should have trained, you should have had a protocol for a wandering student. Nobody, it's unlikely. Like, it never happened before, right? It's just an unlikely thing. It was a fluke thing to have happen. But you make decisions and you handle it. Yeah. What have you learned? What do you forensically learn from it, right? How do you look at it? Kind of like Graham Tamara Wilson, after an event, you call an emergency and you come down and you land a plane and, okay, this is what we learned from it, right? There was either a fault in the product or the airplane, there was a fault in procedure, there was a mistake the pilot made, and if there was due to training, right? There's a part tomorrow we'll talk about. During World War II, the B-17, the Flying Fortress. Initially, I mean, terrific plane, but as pilots would try to like land it and stuff like this, they would crash it, and the military or the Air Force like, well, what's going on here? The pilots, are being careless with this, and they're blaming the pilots, and a cross between like a psychologist and an engineer. I don't know what that title is. Examine these planes and said, well, a few things. You're designing the cockpits different in all these planes. Like if the rudder controls over here in the one B-17, it's in a different location in another, and like all of these things are pretty similar. Like you're using the same exact handle for this as you would for like the wing, as you would for this. So if it's night, right, or you're just like trying to fly by feel, you're going to make a mistake. It's why the keyboard has the two little bumps here, for the home row, F, and I don't even know where to, but so what they did is they redesigned it so all of the stuff was uniformly laid out, and it had a different size and a different texture, so you could fly at night and be like, oh, like this is the whatever control because I recognize it by texture, and then in the plane, and they stopped crashing planes, right? So it was really a design issue. It wasn't a personnel issue. It wasn't a training issue. Again, Graham and I will talk about that tomorrow. I've got that in a blog post, but I don't think people, when they think about 9/11, I don't think they think about the harbor rescue, for one. And if they do think about the harbor rescue, there were a lot of books written like American Dunkirk, Calling All Boats, stuff like that, books that I have, which are very good, but focus on, here are the boats that participated. Here was like the mechanical type of stuff that happened. And no one talks about the psychology, right? That none of this would have worked without Admiral Loy giving the alpha. None of it would have worked without people believing as they're going to Battery Park that there was a rescue force there. Like and not basically people just trying to get off in the water, because water, there could be mine, there could be new other planes coming in, there could be a nuke, who knows. So really it's psychology, right? If the psychology wasn't in place, it would have fallen apart. And probably like the very first 2, 3, 4 boats that pull out and you start to see them leave. So now if you're in the crowd, like you're 100,000 people, right? And you're looking, you're saying, oh, like the boats just pick people up and left. Like you're not fighting to get to the front of the line, right? This isn't a survival, where if you make it to the front of the line, you have a higher chance of getting out, right? You are believing this is an orderly process. So the order on chaos is just that the fact that Loy was decisive, because if people would have got down there and the boats aren't there, and pretty soon, like, who knows what would have happened. So that's the thing, right? Let's go over to the chat. Jordan Smith saying to Jordan, most individuals develop illnesses years later from inhaling debris, like several thousand. Yeah. And testing standards for driving. This is Jordan. Have fallen here too, from what I can see. But then again, I passed on the first try. I was more relaxed back then. So, yeah, the standards for driving, yeah, same here in my state, not the same. So, we took our daughter out and did extra practice. She wasn't always thrilled about it, right? I took out our garbage bins and set them up for parallel parking, and just kind of, like parking in general, and different distances and things like that. So, but that wasn't required. And she also had her in-person driving, but again, we did a lot of driving with her in some different, scenarios. But Vanessa saying, yeah, the toxic exposure during the attack caused many lawsuits. Yeah. And, when I interviewed Nikolai Razavayu, the Soviet cyclist who cycled in Kyiv the day after Chernobyl, right? And in the velocity of information, he shares that, he said, one of my riding, partners died before 30 of cancer, and his coach died before 50 of cancer. They don't know if it was due to, being in a radioactive environment. Now Nikolai is healthy and, still biking and lives in Australia, but, who knows, right? These exposures, but obviously, the what was in the air, and all of probably, lower Manhattan had to be, just horrific, after the towers collapsed. So, Vanessa saying Congress just passed a burn pit exposure bill. Yeah, that should have been implemented just after. Yep, and I saw a lot on that too. Samantha saying, Kitty, nothing does. You could be a Boston firefighter for 40 years. You don't get money for developing Alzheimer, I'm guessing, or cancer. Breathing in toxins is dangerous. It is what it is. You don't blame the state. So, yeah, affordability. Okay. Let's see. Samantha, or if they had proper masking, either that or if it's not worth the risk, don't do it all. Risk rewards. So I'm going to take what Samantha kind of introduced here. And that was something yesterday we covered too. And I was going to get to it. And one of my students said, because, we have these scenarios that play out, and afterwards, like, the media found out about this, and there's like a headline, and it has the open comments, and there's 400 comments. And what I also am trying to have people do is to not get in where they have to defend everything, that armchair quarterback, right? That they've made their decision. You're very succinct and you have your statement, right? But one of the things you do is you evaluate risk and reward, right? So yeah, by having staff, for example, go into that wooded area that is marked no trespassing, is the risk of being in there, a wooded area of healthy adults, right? But not paths. So, you could trip on something, and is that greater than or how does that measure against the reward, which would be the finding of the lost student? But in general, like, we go through the risk versus reward thing. And there's a good point too, because there are times tell people if the reward isn't worth it, right? Don't fight on that hill. Like you have a ton of hills to fight on. There are some things that just aren't worth going to bat on, and going like all just crazy tooth and nail on. One example is a student wears a Betsy Ross flag shirt, right? And someone is saying, oh, that's identified as a extremist symbol, right? Which there was that memo, which was somebody had posted, it was never released formally from the FBI, right? But it was saying there were certain things, Gadsden flag and like a Betsy Ross flag. So someone is saying this, and then, so what do you do? Like, do you is this causing a disruption to the education environment? Does the student have to take the shirt off or turn it inside out? Well, if it's one person, right, and it's because they saw something on the internet from a leaked document that a early version of the U.S. flag is possibly perceived in this way, so basically it was like, you don't do anything with it, right? The kid is just wearing a shirt that has the Betsy Ross flag on it. And this other person is trying to say, oh, like I saw on an article that I read, right, that now that is you can't do that. Well, right. They're trying to drag the principal into policing this stuff. And the principal's like, it's not by the definition of our code of our dress code in school. This isn't in violation of the dress code. It's not causing a disruption. And yeah, I mean, maybe you have an issue with it, but you're having an issue with it because you've been externally influenced by an article telling you should be upset with this, right? It's this thing called negative vicarious rehearsal. And, people are told what to think instead of thinking for themselves, or, this, or like, the Gadsden flag, for example, like things that aren't in school policies, things where schools are not taking students in and saying this is a violation of code of dress code. But this is someone, again, who says, I read an article and the article says that they can't, this sign, signifies like, this is a leaning of this student, right? And you do have to do something. And the administrator is like, nope. And our core thing, you're right, in school is like, if we're educating and reading and math and activities, but it was really going back, someone who saw an article, and that happens a lot these days. I saw this, and this is the way, now I feel that I have to either think. I wrote in philosophy of information, right? Steer your own wheel, so it's harder for others to steer you. And that's really true. That's true. Thanks for the thumbs up, everybody. Thanks for the subscriptions to the show. Thanks for the watch hours. We're getting there. We're closer than we've ever been. So I appreciate that. Also, thanks for supporting my books, School of Airs, and it's $20 or $22 for the paperback. You can also get the audiobook many places. It's more if you go on Amazon, they adjust the pricing higher. But if you have Audible, it might make sense because of your membership. Otherwise, this is $10.99 for audio book on Downpour and other places. Audiobook narrated by me, 6 hours. Philosophy of information. Yeah, the audiobook will be out April 12th, 2023. It's already done. Just as by contract, it releases on that day. It has to be 1 year after the print release. You'll probably start seeing it soon as an option. You just won't be able to buy it. But I think like later this week, it'll actually start showing up in the constellation of my book of saying, here's an audiobook that's done. Just put it in your to get list. It's not out there yet. Got to get your book. So that would be awesome. So, and Ron, why don't you also email me? So my email is safetydoc, not hard to find. It's with the channel thing at gmail.com. So safetydoc at gmail.com. So, yeah. Yeah, good. Anyone else want to bring stuff up? So, Samantha is saying, or has said, my father-in-law will be turning in his grave right now, seeing the way individuals behaved afterwards. He's a true hero. So, this is Solitude Surfer. I have both of Doc's books, and they are terrific. Thank you, Solitude Surfer. Very well written and interesting. The books went through member reviews, member checks, people reading them. They were proofed several times. I wrote them under contract, right? So the publishing house goes through, and 471 endnotes and velocity of information, not as many in School of Airs. And there's custom diagrams, photos, and everything, but you're not going to find spelling errors and wonky things and all of this. I mean, there were teams of people who went through the velocity of information, for example, was submitted. My due date for that was September 1st, it was last year, 2021. So I got it into my publisher. And then from that point on, it took until like Christmas back and forth to get all of the layout done. Or the publisher would say, like, a lot of it had to do with how the book was laid out because there's a lot of graphics in it. And then, or they'd say, we want like additional permission from whatever person you interviewed, like to have them in here. Because, right, if you publish something and say somebody said this and it turns out negative for them, like there's some repercussion, um, you know, if they try to come back and say, well, you misquoted me or something, well, I have every interview, like every word for word, and you have a copy of the interview, and you also have you signed off on that chapter verbatim right before it went to print. But so there was this like 3.5 month span where you're just going back and forth with the publishers. They typeset and arrange things. And then there's another 4 months before the book actually has its release because they build everything up and have to get it in the catalogs. Like these books are around the world. So, my books are, Squamish, British Columbia, in the library, and they're in libraries in China and Germany and the Arab Emirates. And so, it's how that process works. But anyway, so when you get the books, and please, and leave a review, please post a review. You're going to just find a very high quality professional book. And also because, it's from the publisher, like, you're not going to have pages falling out. The books are very well put together. School of Errors is 22 and paperback is like 30 in hard copy. Well, probably makes sense to get the hard copy because, then you have a sewn binding, but even, paperbacks, these are just really well put together books. So this is Heath. Funny you mentioned that I have a sailboard in my garage. So, oh man, that is I haven't been out on the water in a long time. So, yeah. Let me check where we're kind of at. I was I love teaching my university classes, and my fall classes are in person. So when I meet with my students, the first time, I just say, this is a form of edutainment, right? I'm very high energy during class. We're going to do a lot of interactive stuff, like that we're going to have a lot of kind of humor infused in this, but also very respectful. And, like I have the container, they have to draw like an inject of a scenario that could happen. And then, how would we get through this and all this stuff. And, but, and I said, so I'm going to also kind of challenge some things that you probably have held as a truth for your entire time in education. For example, that your state organizations are responsive to all of your needs, right? That they're telling you that the organization of rems.ed.gov exists out there for school safety stuff. Because yesterday I brought that up and I said, who knew about that before I mentioned it? Nobody did. Some other things like, who knows that on January 1st, your state, you have to submit by then to your portal your safety plan for your district to our State Department of Justice. January 1st, right? Like, who's working on January 1st? But who knows that? Okay, which have your organizations talked about this? Have they talked about how to do this? Have they talked about, when you work with your police department, what are objectives when you do your drill? And so has there been a keynote on that? Has there been a breakout of saying our objective would be, we're going to look, our radio communications, do they go from, distance, do people know how to use them? Do they interface with other radios? Staging of assets, how we communicate to parents what's happening in our other schools, how we keep a perimeter, how emergency services interface with students with disabilities or might have fragile needs, or also students with autism. So those are 5 things right there. And people are like, nope, never heard of that before. We've done the drill, we complete the drill, and we never really put together objectives, right? And I'm like, yeah, and your organization should be getting this stuff out to you in some capacity or at conference. You should have heard this. It's like it's being out in the rain, and you walk in and be like, it's a crazy thing. It was raining outside and not a drop of water hit me, right? So I'm perfectly dry. And the reality is, right, this should be so redundant in your organization, some of these big things, that you'd hear about them many times before you get to class, such as, the REMS emergency websites, such as your safety plans. You got to be working on them now to get these things in. So it's not. And then I kind of have this statement of saying, I'm not here to challenge or tell you your organizations um, aren't being complete, right? I'm just saying objectively, right? I just asked you if you knew about this, and you said no, and this has existed for 10 years, right? This resource and the teen cert, which would come to your school, and the how many does Wisconsin require that schools lock doors? Not everybody is for sure on that. Does your district require it? Some people would say yeah. And I'd say, okay, let's go to your policy right now. Log in. Let's find find where it says the doors must be locked. And again, these folks are terrific. They're awesome, right? And I'm saying, hey, I'm not here trying to put you on the spot. I'm not trying to be confrontational. Absolutely not. But right, what you think, or this is where and again, your organizations need to be kind of coming back to you. Look at your policies. Your policy must or should language. When has it been updated? And what do people believe, right? And so that's, by the way, only one state requires that schools lock doors. That's Kentucky. And Kentucky also funds 13 compliance officers to go out and do checks in all of their schools, all their school buildings, to make sure that they're compliant. And if they're not, then they have corrective action that they have to take. No other state does that. So, so we look at this, and then and also from a legislative standpoint, then why aren't your organizations kind of advocating that doors be locked and that the state fund these marshal type positions to come out and to do these assessments? Because if they're doing, 100 schools each, there's 2,300 school buildings from an elementary to a K4 site to whatever, they're also seeing building across from building to building. There's going to be inter-area reliability, and these marshals are going to be able to help you and say, well, here's some schools that have a really good process for doing this. So if you're struggling with it, connect up with them. But so it's one of those, it's kind of like you need to inform the organizations and say, I need this from you. Or if you're doing this organization, you need to be more transparent or more overt in telling me that you're doing it, because I didn't know about it. Maybe it's somewhere on the website, something I'm supposed to access. I'm a brand new soup, right? And all this stuff is brand new to me, and the days are just crazy. So maybe there needs to be a better way for you to interface and get this information to me versus it being on your website. And so maybe I just didn't know that. So maybe it's a training, right? Or maybe it's a mentor or whatever it is. Just try to figure it out. It's not saying people aren't doing their job. It's not saying an organization. It's just saying this information is either not being conveyed or the information isn't there. So the information, if it's not there, how does it get there, right? How do we put it there? So that was good. And yesterday when I stopped with one of the students, was talking about the locked doors, and this is what we do. And I just stopped and I said, okay, you got a laptop in front of you, spend some time and I'll come back to you, spend some time and try to find a policy, right? Try to find where it says the schools are locked, and go right from your webpage of is it right there, or is it then in a handbook? Is it? And of course, it turned out where it wasn't something of saying must lock, because I know nobody does that. I know it's not required by the state. But then again, we come back and say, but you could do this, right? As a superintendent, your board of education would have to pass pass it, right? Or I guess you could do it as a superintendent, but you typically want your board of education to put that into policy. So kind of why not, right? We talk about all these safety things, why not have a policy that your doors are locked during instructional time? And then we got into a great discussion. Well, what if it's after hours? What if we because one of the schools had a system where all of their visitors have to show ID, and then it gets checked within 60 seconds in the system. And so if there any reason they can't be in the school, usually on an offender registry, or there's some conflict of a non-custodial parent or whatever, then they say you have to stay in the office and say talk about the system. I say, well, okay, so it works for you. But then they came out and said, we shut that down at 3:15. We don't do it for the clubs after school and the athletics, and we don't do it for events. And I mean, because how are you going to do that when you have 2,000 people show up at a football game? And so again, it's I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but they realize it. So, but I said, there's points in systems though where, right, if it's a football game, you're going to have different supervision there and stuff. But I said it is a tough question, right? If someone were to ask you, or if I were to ask you, right, if I lived in a district and I said, why do you use this system? Why does the system stop at 3:15 when my kid has art club until 4:20, right? Why does this, why are we fatiguing our system? Well, they don't have the staff, right? Or the other, or why do we not adhere to the lock door policy after 3:15? And just questions. And then again, like I said, just these are the questions you want to have and discuss. And why do we do the things that we do, or not do the things that we think we should be doing, and then take it from there and document that you've had these discussions, because that's the part where it something comes up and it's like, oh, this, it was never talked about, why this set of doors isn't locked after 3:15, versus like there is a discussion about that and there was a rationale for like why these doors would not be locked. It's better that you've considered something than not considered it at all. I'm not going to get into all this, like, negligence and oversight. There are things, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not able to do that, but you need to document and have some way to say, okay, we do things inconsistently throughout our district, but here's why we do it this way, right? So the locked door is a big thing, or like the checking IDs. And some schools do that and some don't. It's kind of expensive. But Jordan saying the people are smarter than the powerful make them out to be. And Vanessa saying, hey, the teacher shortage countrywide. Yeah, about 100,000 teachers in the US. Locally, we see it. My soups, were saying, and one of them just had a teacher hired away by another district, like 2 days before class. And it was a hard to fill position, I think, like a tech position. But so no child left behind. You're right. What it did is it brought in this thing called effective educator. So there were other things that it brought in, but to be a teacher, suddenly you had to take all this professional development to get almost a master certification of teaching. Like, I forget what it was exactly called, but it was a certification that went beyond your teaching credentials. So, and that was the expectation that, your buildings would have a majority of these people who had these, basically took extra classes. But then it got caught up in pay scales. Are you paying people more? And at schools that didn't have collective bargaining, because they didn't have unions for collective bargaining, like Wisconsin, you could take these, but maybe you didn't get any more money. Maybe it was just a stipulation to keep your job. So you basically made people do these effective educator things. I remember, so you'd have to have a peer, another teacher, an administrator, and someone from a university. You would look over your plan and you'd have a plan of like, I'm going to increase my knowledge and whatever. And I'm going to do this by looking over journals, or I'm going to go to conferences. And these things were just busy work. And, back when you should have been saying, hey, like, we're going to decrease class sizes. We're, going to increase books that kids have books. So literacy, right? Increase the libraries, increase that the kids own the books. So that type of stuff, your core business of being a school, increase your nursing services. That's a big shortage in schools. But no, you go on this whole regulation thing. It still exists today. And some of the schools outsource it because it's such a burden. They just hire someone to do the certification stuff for their teachers. Yeah, and this is something that our state should have suspended and the Fed should have suspended during the pandemic and then just gotten rid of, but it didn't. It's just exacerbating the problems, and people know that. Um, there are hoops to jump through, and they're getting to be very, very complex hoops. So, entry control, critically important for security. Yeah. So, to not have locked doors in schools is just really weird right now. And to have the Safer Communities bill pass with $1 billion for mental health and to have all of this money coming out from the states for fortifications. And Kentucky in 2020 passes the bill that you have to have your doors locked during instructional time. Nobody else does it. Why not? You go back to schools that have had sentinel school shootings, multiple students killed at these schools. And you pull up the handbook today, and the handbook, if it does say anything about locked doors, it says should lock doors, doesn't say must. Just weird. And as Vanessa said, it's security, it's knowing who's in your building. It's also, and it doesn't have to be an intruder. It could be a non-custodial parent. It could be somebody who's homeless, and who's in the building. Not that they're going to be a threat, right? But you don't know who is in that building. Is it someone from, hey, we're here from the HVAC, company, but we talked to Pete at district office, the head of custodial stuff, and we need to do some tweaks here on, whatever. You need to know who's in your buildings, right? You need to do that. And of course, it's really strange. We haven't gone there, kind of, I guess, in the school safety community. That's not at the federal level. It's not been proposed, and at a state level, that more states don't follow. And Kentucky got a lot of heat there after they passed this, and a lot of pushback. People were testifying it disrupts our HVAC because the buildings weren't meant to have all the doors closed. According, allegedly, it's hard with younger kids because they want to use a bathroom, so you have to unlock and lock the doors. But to me, this is one of those non-negotiables. It's always a strange point to come back to. Like we have schoolsafety.gov as a new safety clearinghouse website. I'm like, which we didn't need. We already had REM's website. Kentucky has an awesome site for their school safety, which could have been scaled to more of a national level, or make people aware of it. People aren't even aware of these existing resources, right? But nothing about locking doors, right? Nothing where the money is going to say, if you don't have hardcore, solid core doors in schools, most have them because you have to have them by code, but not all. We can upgrade, money could be used to upgrade your doors. And if your locks are older, right, we can do updated locks, not multi-locking, complicated locks, but like we can upgrade your door frame, maybe those types of things. Nobody, an intruder has never gotten into a room by shooting through a locked door. In Red Wing, Minnesota, did get through by shooting out the glass and going. But if you had a solid door, and this also makes a lot of sense in places like Tornado Alley, right, to have a stronger fortified building. But no, we see these things come up, and I'm like, but it's pretty obvious, right? It's pretty obvious we should be locking doors. It's BV, hey, BV Lunas, hey, buddy. Yeah. So that one puzzles me. And so when I put that out yesterday, and I, had it, everybody had a piece of paper, right? And you do this individually because you don't want people, if somebody makes a guess or somebody says something, other people kind of try to align with that, right? It's like a few years ago, I had the principal or superintendent, who talked about socially distanced fire drills as how they were doing safety during the pandemic. And I kind of wish that person wouldn't have said that. I wish I would have had people write down how they were doing that, right? And then I would have gone through those. Because once that person said that, then because then we're kind of like, whoa, like, why would you do a socially distanced fire drill? But I get it, right? Because everything has to be socially distanced and get that. But still, like, it's a fire drill. Got to get people out of the building. So it's a law of necessity, right? Is the law of necessity. I might get, a virus from being close to a kid, or I might not make it out of a burning building. I mean, so am I breaking social distance in order to get out of a building? But it was strange because when that person started off, it changed the whole tone for how everybody responded. Like, there might have been other schools doing that, but then no one was going to say that. So when people turn in their slips yesterday, then I go up to the board, I'm writing them down. People, it ranged from like 0 to 28, the number of states where people thought were required to lock their doors. And we never covered it in class, right? And I told people, I'm like, you don't know this probably, but take a guess. Like, if you were to, so you see this range, right? And that's where you start saying, like, why isn't there more reliability on this? And then also now, as a school leader, like, you can go down to the state when they're having hearings on doors, like Bill 44 in our state a few years ago, and school safety and stuff. You can go down and should go down, contact your organizations. They usually have lobbyists, and, we have names of a few of them. And I've testified at that level. And I said, they'll be more than glad to have you come down, because you are in vivo. You're in the district. You're in the school. Tell them how it's going to impact you. So, and these people, they're not used to that. They haven't heard that. I'm like, yeah, you can go down when these bills are being proposed and they have open, listening, or, they're evoking comments. Go down there for the comment part. Here's what it'll be like. And, but you're informing the legislation that is you're going to have to live with as a superintendent here in the state. So, yeah, keeping the licensure up. Ron Wayne is saying, bus drivers are a problem here too. There's a bus parked in my town with a sign on it asking for people. Yeah, we've got that here. That is pretty chronic, not having bus drivers. So actually in my district where my kids go to school, one of the principals, assistant principal at the high school, drove bus in the morning. And then when he arrived at school, then he was the principal the rest of the time, because they didn't have the bus drivers. Forever, we had crossing guard ads in the paper and up in front of the school. Substitute teachers that's always posted. And, substitute teacher used to be like a $70, $80 a day. And now it's like $150 to $200. And I think the crossing guard, granted, like, that's just like an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, I think they pay you. But it was, again, like, for a day, it went from like $25 a day to, like, I don't know, 30, 40, 50. Those are staffed right now, but I actually wouldn't mind doing the crossing guard thing. I think I'd have a lot of fun with it. But I've got too many meetings and things like that kind of get scheduled out at different times. But yeah, it's a good point. So, we talk about core business. You'll see districts or states like Pennsylvania or whatever. We'll call in our National Guard to drive bus. Yeah, but that doesn't fix things, right? Because the National Guard is leaving a job. Maybe your National Guard person is a teacher, so now they're leaving the classroom to drive a bus, or they're leaving another job. And people are leaving a job. They're leaving something to come and do something else, which works in a very short term, right? The Guard coming in after something, or some short term support, that works well. But it's not meant to be a replacement, because someone has to replace that person, what they're doing then. So, but, so what are solutions to this? Are there tax incentives that you give to people who, drive bus or crossing guards, or do you structure things different for teachers? What does it look like? So we got into that yesterday too. And I said, so how do you analyze the problem? And one of the things I brought up was the happiness study, which is like 160 pages. And I said, don't dismiss this, because that'll be the first indication. Oh, the happiness study. But I'm like, this is very, very well done research, and it's longitudinal and it's multi-country. But I said, once you get to a certain threshold of like salary, So like schools, a school trying to outbid another teacher. So take this question, right? If you lose your wallet, okay, versus like, um, here was the question. Would you rather have 4 times your salary, or would you have your current salary, right, and live in an area that if you lost your wallet, it would be returned to you and it would have everything in it, right? No one would be taking everything out. Um, so here was the response to that. It was 4-1, and this is, this is strong. This is people would say, as long as I, making a livable wage, right, instead of like 4 times the salary and living in an area where I'm not going to have maybe a quality of life isn't going to be as good, or it could be dangerous, right? If I can live somewhere where I know someone's going to return my wallet for sure, right? That's the kind of area I'm going to live in. That's what I want to. That's what I want to be. So I translate, that out. It says, what does this mean? Like, so as a school, right? Like, as you're hiring people and stuff, right? You can't totally just sell people on a community. People have to have a wage and other things. But let's say like, but there are parts of that come into play, right? So how do you frame that? How does this research look? How do your organizations help you communicate this out? Another thing that came up was this November, we have $1.9 billion worth of referendums in Wisconsin for schools, for operating expenses, for building, stuff like that. $1.9 billion. And, so I said, who knows how schools are really funded? Mill rate, how your mill rate gets set. You're required to do special education services, the cost of those. Actually, school buildings typically are a pretty good investment because they're used for a long period of time. The school, the community gets a lot of use out of these buildings. So you amortize them out. It's usually a pretty good setup. But what comes from the state, what comes from the Fed for funding, and people have, like, communities just don't know how this works, right? Or they don't know how long buildings typically last, or like the how new buildings can be integrated so the community can have access to the gyms and stuff like that, and fitness. I mean, whatever. I mean, but like, that's just not out there. So I kind of said, your organizations, again, you're paying into your state organization. I haven't seen one commercial about education in Wisconsin, from your state school boards association or something, saying, here's what our students receive, and here's what our purpose is, and by passing, the schools get funding, and it's been like, you put it into a 30-second commercial, right? And your support is needed, and I think that would be helpful. And a lot of the students are like, yes, that would be, because people, you try to explain the funding thing, and it's kind of like, and I said, there needs to be a campaign that's on your behalf from the organizations that you're paying into. Let's just say school boards, right? To do this at a state level, through media, and to do, and it's not being done. So he says the buses here have photo stop site tickets built into the buses. So when the stop site is out, you pass them. Yeah, which is, I think, a good thing. We, not too far from us, had somebody pass a bus, and the signs had been out, and it was at a regular, a pickup site, and they passed it, and they killed a girl, like a kindergartner, and her brother, I think, was hurt. It was not far away, 30 minutes away from where I live. And someone just rushing, right? And I am 100% behind, you pass a bus when it has its lights on. That should be a non-contested ticket. You get it, you pay it, and there should be a hefty fine that goes with that. Loss of points, impact on your insurance. There's absolutely no rationale for doing that. There is, it's just horrific. It's just horrific, right? Nobody's in that type of hurry. So, oh God, that's just really bad. So I'm glad this technology is out there. It's too bad people are doing that, but I don't know if the technology is going to be a deterrent. But I guess if you do it once, you're probably going to do that more than once, right? If you're not caught. So, Bacon is saying to Vanessa, when I hear someone else is being critical of teachers or the industry as a whole, we're not talking about you. We're actual good teachers. My instructor once taught sixth grade. So, yeah. I'm not following the chat close enough, and I know many of you are moderators. If there is anything that is needing a little more attention, that the moderators are tending to it or trying to bring it to my attention. But no, my point, I guess with in saying with the teachers is, the Safer Community bill passes, right? And the funding isn't coming out for more teachers. It's coming out for ancillary mental health and things like that, which is, it's different than saying we have $100,000 teacher shortage. We're going to address the shortage. Because, let's say you have a school and suddenly, your second grade teacher has 40 students because there aren't enough teachers, and usually would have 18 students. Now they have 40. Well, you don't have your threat detection system is down, right? Because you don't have that relationship to understand what's really going on with the kids. They don't feel that they have the trust in the teacher, right? So all of that is compromised when you don't have your core kind of business, right? A teacher would say, there's so much I would do differently with a class of 18 of individual instruction I could give a small group that I just can't provide with 40 students. So when the bills pass, it's like it didn't go there. It didn't help out the core, I guess the core business. If we look at any business, there's always a core business of what you do, and it's going to the ancillary. And I'm like, there's ancillary needs, but the ancillary needs will be persistent if the core isn't addressed. If we don't bring in more teachers, and fund programs for, so one of the things that came up yesterday was there are some programs in our state where you can become a teacher in a very streamlined way that doesn't require you to take all the requisites in college. But these programs aren't very well communicated out. Meaning you might have someone who, retired out of a business or military, or someone is in a career and they want to go to something else, like Graham, who was a machinist, went in to be a flight instructor, would be on the show tomorrow. But they look and they're like, I'd like to be a teacher, but then I have to enroll and I have to take 4 years of classes, all these prerequisites. They don't know that these other options exist. And that was something yesterday my new soups talked about and said, we wish there was more done to let people know. And I said, that's, again, your organizations have to do that, right? That you're paying into thousands of dollars to work in media to get this stuff out there to people, which is probably TV and commercial and radio or internet ads or whatever, or, to let the people know about these programs that would address a shortage. Because, and I know one person who is in one of those programs just because one of their relatives knew me, right? And I'm like, these programs exist. Like, there's a way into this. But so, oh man, you also said 2 million. Well, yeah. So the school staffing shortage existed before the pandemic, but right with the pandemic, it's really hard to start up now. And as I shared, yesterday, I said essential, non-essential, and all of that, right? People are going to start any career, right? But people are going to be hesitating to go into teaching, thinking I might have my classroom, right? My students in the brick and mortar, and suddenly like we have to go online, so I have to move everything online. And what if I'm required to do like both, like teach and then teach at night, which some teachers were. So a shout out to our friend Andrew. Hey, Andrew. Hey, buddy. Everyone who graduated high school had 13 years of training. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. There are alternate paths. There are, and right, these aren't very well known to people. And if you're trying to use them as a recruitment tool, and I think part of it is, we were just honest yesterday. Part of it is the universities probably don't want people to know about this, right? Like if your 4-year university program, you have that versus we're it's the tuition and someone's staying in a dorm. And granted, like if you're probably in your 30s, you're not going to do all of that stuff, but staying on campus. But it's competition, right? Everyone is. If we really come down to it, these aren't known because of competition, and the state organizations probably don't want to do it because they don't want to show some favoritism. Where I would come in, I'm much different in class, right? I'm very overt with this and saying, it is. You got to make people aware of this. So that's where you have to kind of maybe take that alpha position, and other people might say, well, now you're against the 4-year college, which has been your friend. I'm not against them at all, but here's another path, which is there. And the bottom line is to try to increase the core business, which is teachers in the classroom, and both of you can work together. And if for some people, this is going to be easier from a path of, it works better with their schedule and things like that versus the semester schedule the university puts together. This is maybe done in modules or whatever. Then go for it. But it's protecting, right? And if you're seen endorsing one, you're automatically perceived as not endorsing the other or against the other. I guess that's how people perceive it. And I actually said, I said this yesterday. I said, I'm retired, right? So I can tell you things. I can say things that I could not probably do if I was working for a district, right? Or, in a different university program, or whatever. I maybe like, I still think I'm a very strong individual, right? And I've, written the books and been on TV and expert witness. I mean, so some of this is just, I'm able to do this. And I said that obviously I said, I'm in a different position than, you're sitting in a chair, but I said, there are certain things, right, where you need to ask your organizations, why aren't you taking ads out to make people aware that they can get these programs? As I sit here 4 teachers down, why don't we have funding coming out from the state for us so we can send out in our newsletters and our local newspapers, hey, like there's this program, and if you live here, you can do it, and we'll actually open up like the school lab. If who needs computer labs anymore, but like we'll loan you a Chromebook if you want to do it, or you can use our Wi-Fi. I mean, whatever, these things. But we have we have the safer community bills, and then we have the part of that bill I didn't talk about because we had so many other things kind of on the first day. I'll bring it up in the next class. But if you're an 18-year-old and you're having a background check for a firearm, the school now might be asked to provide records, right? So, and I'm like, well, what does it look like? It's not very clear in the legislation. So what if someone comes to you and they want attendance records or behavior records or disability or what do you do? Like, do you have a policy for this? What have your state organizations told you? Because the bill passed. I brought it up, and I did bring it up. And I think I did actually. Now I mentioned it. We didn't get into it though of what you're doing, but I said, have you been told this? Are you aware that this exists? That there could be on Monday when you go in, there could be a request for an 18-year-old student who's put in to buy, whatever, a firearm, and now you're getting this request that you never got before. It was never part of the law. And so they'll be like, nope. And I'm like, okay. So then through right now, and then working with your larger organizations and other, you got to come up with a plan for this, some policy, and talk to your school board and say, hey, we need a policy. So if some schools buy their policies, which I don't think is bad. you customize it out to the school. I actually think it's a good thing to have a contract because policies are really complicated and they change all the time. Schools, there are still schools that try to just do this on their own, like they do all their policies and match them up with the laws. I'm like, oh, it's I just think that it's gone beyond a point where that makes sense for any school to do that. For you have limited resources, I wouldn't be putting them into developing my own policy. I would be adopting as much policy and adapting policy as I could. So it's our friend Robert Kusland. We see often in Twitter, and hey, Robert. So the only thing more disappointing than academia is government. Yeah, well, I'll tell you. I mean, I absolutely love being a university professor. I instructed at a private university, and I instructed a terrific. I've always been surrounded with incredible people. I teach. Like I said, I teach in a building that's built in 1880 that looks as it did the day it was, built. I mean, it's kept up, and it hasn't been overhauled. So, you go in and you still have the woodwork and the slates. Although the room I was in had whiteboards and was one of the, I would say, the more modernized rooms. All the facilities are extremely well maintained. And a different class I teach in a room that has the slate and the higher ceilings and stuff like that. But overall academia, like I have 2 masters and a PhD and stuff. Like I need to do that someday, bring out my transcript. 50% of the courses I took were completely not necessary. There was nothing substantially I gained from 50% of the courses I took. Now, there were courses that were incredible. Like, I could go through and say this. I mean, there was a business class. I think it was Business 563 or something like that. It was a summer class I took, and my God, like that thing was awesome. And I remember the class where I learned the SWOT analysis, and I learned the item analysis class, and I can go back into, some of these classes where like, holy smokes, stuff I use like in my real life things. And then just classes that were, I don't remember anything from them at all. So, hey, see Heath says our good friend Solitude Surfer, and I'm going to back him up on that. Thanks for being here, buddy. Appreciate you very much. So yeah, when I consider K-12 education or pre-K-12, what happens is I think it was a very well-built ship, right? But over the years, there's a lot of barnacles, right? And you just can't take the ship and dry dock it to scrape all the barnacles off and to retrofit and do all this stuff. You're trying to do it like in the moment while the ship's still sailing. And there's just a lot of stuff that, from a structural basis doesn't make sense. Like, why do we do semesters? Like, why do we do that? Why do we do grade levels? And there's just really quirky structural things. Some schools broke out of the 9 periods or 8 periods a day to a block schedule, but that was, I think, a good thing. So you might have 2 times a week, but now you're meeting for 2 hours, at a time. But there's just a lot of quirky stuff. Like, I don't think we would build it how it exists. Like, we wouldn't build it at all that way today if we had to start over. So just, I mean, structurally how we have schools. It's weird too, because like I see these brand new school buildings open up right now where, and these things were being built during the pandemic, right? And they're not designed for social distance learning, right? They're not built with more wash fountains or, like bathrooms and be able to wash hands, and the ventilation systems where you can have a higher MERV rating of filtration. They have where they're more efficient. They basically, you don't open the windows in any of these new buildings. It's just all controlled, but like they're not like super high filtration rates. That's very expensive to do, by the way, right? Like because you have to have a bigger motor and to get that circulation without also having it sound like there's a hurricane through your you know your vents. um, that's a complicated process. That's why like hospitals only have certain operating rooms and certain rooms that have that. Otherwise, it's kind of like what your home is. But yeah, it's kind of weird. It's weird stuff. As far as government, oh man, Robert, the decline of I don't know what quality of government. It's quality and decorum. I had this talk with a priest friend of mine a couple of years ago, and I said to him, I said, what disturbs me most right now about government is government has always had horse trading, right? It's never been quite legit, but you had people who would they'd play the part. You'd be formal, and you would address, and you wouldn't swear at another senator or legislator or curse or give the finger or things like that have happened in Congress, right? And things all the way in presidential cabinets, like the press secretary, Jen Psaki, at the start, as inflation was really starting to ramp up, of saying something like, hey, chill out, Americans, and go boxing and drink a margarita, something to that effect, right? Holy smokes. Like the decorum is gone. Like you would never say anything like that to people. I mean, and just the empathy and kindness, I am just, there was just I don't know. There was some dignity with the position, I guess. And I ran for city council, didn't get voted in, but I ran. And this is how I would have dressed if I would have been voted in, and I wouldn't have sworn or yelled at meetings. Not that people do that, but I mean, I guess like I would have been like, oh, like, thank you, community, for voting me in, and I'm going to be a good representative, good steward for you. People don't do that. So, oh my goodness, BV, leave it capitalist. So yeah. That is, I don't know. Quality in government, Bacon saying 2 words that belong in the same sentence as vegan and food. Yeah. It was disappointing, right? I guess for all of my years to see that, and to see people, there was a certain seriousness, a Robert's Rules and Orders, a process you went through that people don't do anymore. And it's a personal dignity thing, right? I think the way that you handle yourself and address other people, and but these systems have become very large and they've become very abstract. And when I talked about this fall, we have $1.9 billion in school referendums, which is a crazy amount of money, is a big number. But a lot of these will pass because people just vote yes. And not that they should vote necessarily no for these, but the tendency now is that these referendums pass, these billing referendums, most of them will pass, most of these recurring whatever salaries referendums pass. But let's get out of that. Let's go like at a national deficit. So deficit is what, $31 trillion? What's the difference between 31 and 55 trillion? I mean, it's an abstract thing. I mean, how do you think of a trillion? Like, what does that mean? So when you start working with these numbers, these figures that are so abstract, and you're like, well, we're at 31 trillion and it doesn't seem like it's getting real bad, right? Like when I say that, obviously there's inflation things, but it's not like suddenly, the government has doubled my taxes in the last year or something like that, or the government keeps expanding. We still have government buildings and government services. I guess we have 87,000 more IRS agents. But so I think also in my lifetime and more recently, this whole abstract concept has come in, where it just does. It's these numbers and things have gotten so big, you can operate underneath them without anybody questioning them. Oh, it's 31 trillion, it's 55 trillion, it's 99.2 trillion. Um, you know, and what does it really mean? And I mean, and it's also such a Goliath, right? Um, what oh, it is. Oh, I'm thinking, what am I thinking? Um, there's a word. It's not transference dynamic. No. Leviathan. Hobbes' Leviathan. The book, Hobbes' Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes, 1600s. It's a Leviathan, right? It's government's gotten too big. It's so big, you don't know where it starts and ends. And as far as like money, it's so abstract, it doesn't mean anything. So Andrew's saying, if you have $1 million a day every day for 2,000 years, it's only 730 billion. Whoa. Well, yeah. So like we look at that and it's like, okay, but there's no shock value, right, Andrew? Like no one is in here and no one's like, oh my God, like we've got to try to get this deficit down. We've got to try to rein in spending. We need austerity. We need responsibility. No one's doing that. No one, because it's like, and if you put it out there, it's just defeatist anyway. Why try? Like there's nothing we can do or I can do, or why lower our standard of living, to do this. Like, I don't want to feel the pain. Robert's Rules of Order was developed by Robert Kuzlin in 1979. So I don't know. No, I know it wasn't, but it's a joke. But yeah, Robert's rules, much like the art and method of debate, are lost to far too many people. Absolutely true. I have Robert's Rules of Orders is how to conduct a meeting. So I actually have the book somewhere. It's a small book, but it's like, I initiate action. Okay, we'll have discussion. Do we have a vote? Do I have a second on the vote? How many for, how many against, and those type of things. That's all Robert rules. It's very well laid out. School boards follow that. At least they should. There are many times I watch school board meetings or a superintendent while in class will say, this was last year, literally came into class and said, all of our school board meetings are online. And can we bring up the one that we had last Monday night and go to 18 minutes and 42 seconds? And let's just play this like 2-minute clip. Am I crazy? Or was this like not at all Robert's Rules of Order? Was this just people like doing what they wanted? And then I was like, holy smokes. Like, I don't know what that was. So then like, how do you function when, so Robert's Rules of Order was to make sure that you had this process, right? It was largely that to get you through a meeting, that you would call an agenda point forward. It would be discussed, right? And then you would have a vote to act on it, or maybe table it or whatever. But there was this very defined. It is a very, 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 very defined process, and it was that way to get you through and to be very consistent in all of these things, and it worked very well. But right, as Robert Kuzlin said, people don't know about it unless you have to use it. But it was a pretty big thing. I mean, from a PTO to an Elks Club meeting, to have a general sense that there would be this process where something would be brought up and then it would be discussed. And as Robert said, debate, he's right on with that. High schools used to teach debate. They had debate clubs. When my brother was in high school, they had a debate team. And on Saturday night at 6:00, it would be on TV, our local Channel 7. And so you'd have your debate team against another school, and you'd be debating topics, right? And panel would score it out. And Larry Lawton, America's Biggest Jewel Thief, who was on the show, and I wrote about in Philosophy of Information, Larry said, one of the things he sees now with young offenders, criminals, is they don't debate, right? It's something, if it offends them, then they will attack you or they'll kill you, right? They don't try to learn perspective. And he said, when he was in jail, in prison in the 90s, and you had the prisoners, so, guys who were 40s and 50s and stuff, I mean, they lived where, yeah, you didn't have to agree, but there was some kind of respect on opinion. Like you would listen to someone's opinion or try to figure out their opinion. So there was this, I don't know, even in prison, like Larry said, that was there, right? And that's gone now. Schools don't teach it. And I think they don't teach it because, right, if you debate something, you can also, you can put things out there, but there are empirical truths to things, right? So I think it can be perceived as a microaggression. I don't know why they don't do debate. But how many schools have debate teams, debate clubs, and state tournaments for debate and debate on TV, right? It's gone. And the real skill of an orator to debate, and that's something I learned, and I think I use well, but I also learned it from people. So there's not a college class in debate. You're not required to take a class like that in high school. That's a really good point. I've noticed that too. The debate, it bothers me. So Vanessa's saying, from 1980 to 2022, we went from 1 trillion to 32. So it's terrifying, right? To look at that. And that's nuts. That is just, wow. Yeah, a scant 42 years. So again, and then so we get to core business, right? As a government and a legislative body, the core business is getting, you're serving the people, right? You're strengthening the power grid for them. You're improving the roads for them. Maybe you're, brokering sharing of intellectual property in a 3D age, right? So it can be leveraged for the benefit of people. Like when they took off IP regulations for intellectual property for printing ventilator and mask parts during a few months during the pandemic. So if you print it 3D and someone had a copyright, you weren't going to get in trouble during a certain window because there's a big shortage for things, right? But right, in government, right, to do that and to have a diplomacy aspect of government to have fostered diplomatic relations and not sending billions and billions of dollars out to other countries in promoting war. So your core business, right, is all messed up. So you do all these bills of these ancillary things. Oh, we're passing, whatever, and so that don't help people, right? The road is still bad. The bridge is still bad. The water systems aren't better. The power, California's saying we have $100 billion surplus, but yet, your infrastructure is horrible. So, right, government is there to serve us, and it's just not, that feeling is not there. The next 20 years, we'll have the national debt greater than the amount of years to get to that point. That will be 62 years since we went beyond $1 trillion, in 20 years that will be, yeah. And that is so, like I said, it's abstract, right? Even if you really sat down with kind of had a scholarly debate on this, you don't have to be, a advanced degree, right? You just have to sit down and talk about this. All of us have budgets and how things cost, whatever, and It's just crazy. But, you know, I really believe people want legislative bodies want this abstract nature of things because it just confuses people, and people don't. No one can relate to that in their personal life. I mean, maybe a millionaire on TV. You probably know a billionaire, right? No one knows a trillionaire, right? I mean, so these things just get abstract. So PV is saying won't exist in 20 years. It's very unpredictable, right? Won't recognize it today. The entropy of systems is alarming too. So not only systems such as the power grid and roads and trains and railroads and stuff like that, but our systems of finance and like the IRS saying we're buying 2 years in returns, and just systems being able to get an appointment with healthcare, police saying we can't provide services anymore because the gas allowance for the month is used up. So this entropy of systems is, and so once, it's like a little bit of rust on a car, right? If you address it early, you can, usually fix it. It doesn't look the same. It's not like when it was new, but functionally it's still good. But once the whole panel rusts out, you're not going to really be able to fix that, right? Unless you put a massive amount of time. And now you're also having to take the car out of commission for a while. And so these systems are hitting these entropy points that they didn't hit before. And they're very large systems with a lot of parts and people moving in and out of them. And so they just continually ratchet down, they degrade. So thanks for the 22 thumbs up. I appreciate it. And thanks for continuing to watch the show. I'm working hard to, get the hours. We have a great show tomorrow with Graham Wilson. But just keep going, the thumbs up, sharing the show, replaying it, listening, stuff like that. PV Luminous saying the easiest prediction to make is the downfall. Yeah, I'm typically a positive person, or at least I'm a realist, but it's hard to see anything that changes. Now, with that said, I guess, I was very optimistic and I remain very optimistic for 3D printing as we go from warehouse to just-in-time to 3D printing, what 3D printing can do. And, for just for society, right? The things that we can create, the how quickly we can get things, and the innovation and bringing in the collective brain power to solve things. And but right, like, that's innovation, which is happening as other things are falling apart. So, do you innovate a car, but then the roads are completely unsafe to drive on because they haven't been maintained, right? So, yeah. So, Vanessa saying, I've heard of your country's downfall my entire life. So why aren't we listening? So I don't know. So yeah, Vanessa saying like COLA formulas, they change the methods as entities used in the computation start having huge swings in values. I was watching a video. It was a mechanic, and the mechanic was showing like parts, like just car parts, and saying the tolerances for car parts as a mechanic for the last, like 20 years were usually pretty good for a lot of parts. If OEM parts that you're buying, right? Like if you had a tie rod or whatever, like you didn't have to go in and check all of the measurements on it. Like you took it out of the box and put it in. And he said now, like just in the last 12 to 15 months, the stuff the machining quality is just bad, right? On this stuff, which you think would be largely automated, but then, who's keeping the machines up, right? So that's the question he was saying, who's tending to the the CAD machines and the machines that are actually doing this. And I heard something too at the US Mint, like there was an issue that some of the machines weren't being maintained, so the coins were not being, it was there were more errors in coins that were coming out, or bills or stuff, like simply because like you weren't, it's like doing a typewriter and you never changed the typewriter ribbon. And so there is this whole aspect to it of entropy. Well, thank you, Ron Wayne. I appreciate that very much, and congratulations on your 1,000,000 view video, and the shout out from Flying Rich. So appreciate you, and mentioning the safety doc and things. I do appreciate all of you. So Vanessa saying quality control and inspections, yeah, those type of things, right? How much sampling are we doing of things? And if it's not, then who's going in and correcting it, right? So I hear that a lot from friends who kind of work in construction. They're like, just building a house nowadays, everything that you get from a 2x4 to a window to whatever, I mean, it's like they're like, it's the stuff just isn't, it's not standard, right? Like you can get 5 2x4s and they're all of a different measurement or different warp, or there's something in the windows, or so it's just crazy. And yeah. So it's Ron Wayne. I'm gonna do this for Ron Wayne. I'm gonna give him a wow. Dun dun dun. So, and I'm gonna and for congratulations on his 1,000,000 view video. It's Ron Wayne. So appreciate it. So we've had a lot of questions tonight. That's a bad one. That covers my head. I can't be that way. No. Do a light bulb. So, well, I don't know what Ron's channel link is. If anybody knows it, please post it. Well, I think Vanessa's done it. Thank you, Vanessa. BV Lunas, look at the ancient stone buildings from supposedly the 1700s, then see what we have today. Yeah. I'm glad I live in a house that was built with Douglas fir rafters, which my house was built in the 70s. And, when I'm drilling drywall into a Douglas fir rafter, it's taken everything my Makita's got, because, I mean, that is just solid. It's not press board. And, this house is very, very well put together. And man, I mean, this house will last. I mean, we put steel siding in it, but like anything, you have to keep things up. But how long does, some of the ancient roads, the roads built by the Romans are still in existence today. So I was just at Rins to ensure I sub, or Ron's. Thanks for subbing over, to Ron Wayne. So let's do a check and see how many subs we have here to the safety doc. I don't know if you're into fantasy football, but I have some good news. I won my one league. I won both leagues last year. I won the first game, and I think in the other league, I'm going to win. I just need Russell Wilson to have a pretty good night tomorrow. It's good to get a start where you have a couple wins. So let's go to, let me tell you exactly what YouTube is telling me. All right. So I didn't gain any subscribers during the show. So, all right. But, so tell your friends, or when you do your shows, please do that. I do have, oh my goodness. So we're 50 watch hours closer. So we're down now to 605 hours we need. So, which is our closest point to being monetized. Again, we have a really good show tomorrow with Graham Wilson, pilot and flight instructor. Graham has a great sense of humor too. Graham is kind of like a Scott Adams and his channel. So it's Corey Slater. All right. So I'm going to go to bed. It's still raining here. It's rained for like now 2 day and a half straight. And I have my voice for tomorrow. So tomorrow starts at 7. That is for to accommodate. That is to accommodate Graham. So 7 Central, and we will end at 9. So it won't be. It'll still be a 2-hour show, but that's what Graham and I had worked out. So I've got some other guests lined up too, and those shows will be shorter. And I don't know if they'll all be like real time. They might just be premiere because some people, it's like, hey, I haven't been on a YouTube channel, or I want to make sure it's not longer or whatever. But anyway, tomorrow is live, 7 o'clock Central Time until 9 with Graham. If you have questions about airlines, small pilot stuff, he's a lot of stories to share, and he's going to talk about he thinks there's a lot of crossovers between school safety and kind of like being a flight instructor. So, all right. So Robert, all right. So yeah, as my closing here is Ron Wayne. We appreciate you, Ron Wayne. I do. I appreciate your site. I appreciate your podcast. So here is School of Errors, most honest book ever written about school safety. Hey, if you have people, friends, right, relatives who have kids in school, get them this book. This is $22 a paperback. It's really well done. But then everything we talked about tonight with 9/11, the psychology, transference dynamic, and things like that, it's all in here. 3 chapters on that. This is a 54 reviews. If you've read it, go ahead and please leave a review. It's been at 54 for a while. It'd be great to wake up tomorrow and have 55 reviews out there, 57 or something like that. So yeah, this book, it's in libraries all around the world, and it's available in ebook, hard copy, audiobook, $10.99, and you get this. It's narrated by me, 6 hours. Then Velocity of Information, which released in April. This is really, kind of the truth book of 2020. It is, what happens to people when they get 90 days into chaos, how they kind of burn out, how people some people never come back from that. You might know people, might be in your family, essential, non-essential. I work through all of that in this book, kind of the lexicon stuff of like how it changes everything that we do going forward. And this book is centered on 12 interviews. One Brown, pilot, Juan Brown, Larry Lawton, Linda Stone, crab boater Robert Travis, Aaron Sawyer, Redline VR in Chicago. It's an awesome book. Really well cited. It's all done at the end of chapters, so it doesn't slow you down. Start up the Smoky Mountain Fire, collapse of physical time. This is phenomenal, right? So also in a lot of libraries, and hard copy, which is expensive because they sell to libraries and university stuff, paperback and ebook. This is an audio, but the audio releases April 12th, 2023 per contract. But again, I appreciate that you support my stuff. I appreciate when you review it. It is so important. This book is up for the S.I. Hayakawa book as the best semantic work or word meaning. And I should know this week if it received it or not. That also comes with a $1,000 cash prize. And receiving that award instantly gets this book into so many more libraries and universities and just exposure. And it's an Institute of General Semantics is a really huge accolade for the book and for me. And of course, the more reviews, the more people become aware of the book. It shows up in more libraries. I think it just also makes a stronger case for the book as it's being considered for the award. So reviews are just everything for books. It's the lifeblood of books. Reviews are so you helping me is so important. And many of you have written reviews for my books and have posted my books on your social media. And thank you for doing that. So Okay, I'll let you guys know. I will definitely be sharing if I receive the award. So, um, non-essential, someone should pay. Yeah, that whole essential non-essential. This thing here, by the way, like I had this a couple of years ago, and then I took it out. It's a pool noodle, and then a piece of cardboard that I have the safety dock. So, because I was shooting with a camera that was overhead a little bit, so it was easier to kind of see. And but I'll take this off. But it's kind of a neat thing, and so I brought it back out. Um, and then I might change the name. So I think what I would do is just do like um, oh, here. So just say like the safety dock down there, which it says in the corner, which is redundant, or I could say like David P. Brown, whatever. But I'm going to keep my little thing on here. I think I'm going to get a different mic. I've been saying that for a while. I'm real tempted to get a headset and just like not deal with a mic at all. Really, just have a headset with a mic built in. For what I do, I think that would work pretty well. Whenever I do consulting, I always use a headset with a mic, but it's a cheap Logitech. It works pretty well, but like it's not this. Give me your old mic so I can start podcasting, Andrew. So yeah, I've had this one. I mean, there's nothing, I guess, really wrong with it. I think the Rode NT USB, you don't have to go as high on the gain. I'm pretty jacked on the gain on this, and it doesn't seem normal. Like I'm close to this. Like if you look at Aaron Clary has the same exact microphone I have, and he's sitting in a chair and the microphone is up here. I mean, there's a distance between him and the mic. Well, if I did that, you wouldn't even hear me. So, yeah, I have to consider that. But decisions. Hence, yeah, I don't know. Right. I gotta think it out. I like and I also like the multi video view, which I did tonight at the start, which is simple with the phone. It's actually the easiest way. Then I just log into my Wi-Fi and then I just bring it in as another guest. But that dies, but I can easily fix that with my Anchor power pack, as I'll just plug it in and that'll go through the whole show. And then I can kind of use different angles. Like next show I can do a different angle. And I saw somebody on YouTube had a little video on how to do that. They're like, hey, like, do you have a phone like that? You're just upgraded, but your phone's still good. And hey, do you want to do and I'm like, that is a good idea. And it took a couple minutes to set it up. And I'm like, that is slick. That is really slick, right? Because what else would I do with this phone? And the thing with the phone is it really has no practical use without changing out the battery, because the battery goes so fast on this old phone. But if I can have it charged, like permanently plugged in as I'm recording, then it just becomes a nice camera and it can Wi-Fi out. So that was like score. Thank you, random YouTube person, for doing that. So, Andrew blocked me, would run two cameras. So I like having a different camera setup. What I like about it is I like that you get to see the office. That there's more to it than just like this. Because there is a really cool wall with the paintings and the cool wall with the book covers and the fireplaces over here. And so like I think like it's a better context, right? If you're listening, or if you're listening, then you have no idea, right? Because I'm just switching through video. But if you're watching it, I think it's more entertaining to have the angles kind of switch from time to time to get the context of this office area. So I don't know if that makes any sense, or if it even means anything to you. Maybe like I'm doing this, you guys are like, it means nothing to us, Dave. It's okay. It's, it makes you happy, then we're all for it. But I am not. But I like it. I'm having some fun with that. So All right, I'm going to take us out. So please watch. Please tell people to subscribe. Thanks for this thumbs up. Yeah, like I said, so far, this show didn't gain any subscribers. I'm not out here to kind of stump for subscribers because I have no subscribers. I don't have enough watch hours for monetization, but I would like, more people to subscribe, right? And a big thing with subscribing is, Graham's channel is smaller than mine. It will be larger because he's doing more regular shows, and I think he just has a very interesting topic, a good personality, but he hasn't been doing shows that long. But for someone to come on a show, right, the more subs you have, the more likely someone is going to say, yeah, I'll be a guest on your show. So, once you get above, we're at now 1.21K. Okay. And I have 186 shows. That's legit. And then, so all of those things, but dun, dun, dun. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And let me do a couple sweet graphics here for us on the way out here. So, whoa, and whoa. We have a 20th, and we have this. And we have this one, which I should use at the start, and I didn't. And then, I don't know. What do we have here? We have me wearing an Uncle Sam hat. So. All right. Now I can't get out of this. All right. Okay. Oh God. And please, 7:00 tomorrow night, be here. And I created a 1.5-minute spoof skit that I'm going to surprise Graham with. That's based on a true thing that happened in a flight emergency. And it is funny stuff. I recorded it and edited it together. It is funny stuff. So be sharing that tomorrow during the show. And all right. Good. Have a good night, everybody. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. So.
As chaos erupts, torrents of conflicting yet urgent messages gush from media outlets. What is the magnitude of the incident, and what should people do to protect themselves? Dr. David Perrodin clarifies human behavior during days, weeks, months, or even years of chaos. Reporter James David Dixon of the Detroit News proclaims, "The velocity of information is an education in the way people react and adapt to change. Never has it been more important to sift facts and stories for truth and meaning. The velocity of information will teach you how people have done it in history, in the modern day, and even in prison. There are teachable moments on every page." Buy The Velocity of Information, Human Thinking During Chaotic Times. Available from your favorite bookstore or online retailer. A must-read for parents, teachers, and taxpayers. Dr. David Perrodin has written the most honest book about the $3 billion school safety industrial complex. Attorney James Sibley proclaims, "A brave demonstration of speaking truth to power. School of Errors rips the lid off the billion-dollar school safety industry." Using real-world examples of successful responses in desperate situations, David contrasts the expensive window dressings pitched to panic parents with the inexpensive and effective approaches proven to actually work. Read this book before you let your school waste another precious dollar on meaningless safety theater. Buy the international bestseller School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America.
Describe the odor. Is it like when something electrical is burning? And so on. Ridiculous, right? We don't shift the investigation to the reporter. But that's covertly what the school district thought needed to happen to prevent their investigation scrambling principals from burning out. And as this paragraph smolders, it would be prudent to consider bringing students with disabilities from the sidelines of safety and and center them to active roles of detecting and reporting threats. So we had a rather difficult meeting. Upon due diligence of examining the reporting system, I informed the district representative that I could not justify modifications to the existing model, as such changes would make the system less accessible to students. Well, that was a short chit-chat. The district folks believed, or hoped, that the threat input system could be modified and maintained with fidelity. I wasn't in alignment with that hypothesis, and so I was thanked and given notice that our partnership would be over at month's end. Business is business, but in school safety, it's never as simple as that. Hi, everybody. This is the Safety Doc with a face validity check-in here on March 31st, 2020. Bellevue, Washington has started a tool to report stay-home violations. This is from the government website in Bellevue, Washington. So we're going to scroll down here to My Bellevue portal and then to report gatherings. They've made it convenient. There's a map on the right. You can drag a location over here into address, write a description, and then also include photos. This is a practice we've seen in some areas of the country, but it's going to be more prevalent. Look for it in your area, probably in the next week or two.